Get your goddamn hands off my patient. Dr. Marcus Castellanos' voice cracked like a whip through the ER. His face twisted with contempt as he physically shoved the night nurse backward. Sarah Mitchell stumbled, her gloved hands still extended toward the dying Marine on the gurney. Castellanos didn't even look at her, just dismissed her with a flick of his wrist like she was nothing, nobody invisible. I don't know what backwater nursing school you crawled out of, but in my trauma bay, you don't touch critical patients. You fetch, you follow. You stay the hell out of my way. The words hung in the air like poison. But before you find out what happens next, hit that subscribe button right now. Stay with me until the very end of this story and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this journey goes. Trust me, you won't believe where this is headed. The automatic doors of Mercy Heights Medical Center burst open at 0247 hours, and chaos poured in with the cold October rain. Moved Marine down multiple GSWs. The paramedics wheeled the gurney in fast, their boots squeaking on the polished floor, their faces tight with the kind of fear that comes from watching a man bleed out in the back of an ambulance. The patient, Gunnery Sergeant Cole Ramirez, according to the dog tags bouncing against his blood-soaked chest, had taken 3 rounds. One in the shoulder, one in the abdomen, one in the upper thigh that had turned his tactical pants into a crimson mess. Sarah Mitchell was restocking Trauma Bay 3 when she heard the commotion. She'd been working nights at Mercy Heights for 18 months now, deliberately choosing the shifts when the hospital slept, when the hallways were quiet, when she could disappear into her work without questions, without recognition, without the past reaching out to grab her by the throat. She stepped into the hallway just as they rolled Ramirez past. That's when everything stopped. The Marine's eyes glazed with pain and blood loss locked onto her face. His hand shot out with a speed that shouldn't have been possible for a man half dead, grabbing the gurney rail so hard his knuckles went white. Ghost, he rasped. Just that one word, but it carried the weight of 1,000 memories. Ghost, need, ghost. Sarah's blood went ice cold. The paramedic didn't understand. Sir, you need to calm down. We're getting you help. No, Ramirez's voice gained strength from somewhere deep, somewhere primal. His eyes never left Sarah's face. Ghost, she stays. Ghost, stays with me. Dr. Marcus Castellanos emerged from the physician's lounge. At precisely that moment, coffee in hand, his white coat crisp despite the late hour. He was a man who wore his credentials like armor. Harvard Medical School, Johns Hopkins residency, 10 years as head of trauma surgery. He walked with the confidence of someone who'd never been wrong or never admitted it when he was. What's the holdup? His voice carried that particular blend of authority and irritation that Sarah had learned to recognize in doctors who measured their worth in titles rather than lives saved. Trauma Bay 1 now. I'll take it from here. The Marine's grip on the gurney tightened. Ghost. Castellanos finally looked at Sarah, really looked at her for maybe the 3rd time in the 18 months she'd worked there. His gaze was dismissive, measuring her value in half a second and finding it wanting. Mitchell isn't it night nurse? He said it like it was a diagnosis. Trauma Bay 3 needs restocking. That'll be all. Sarah opened her mouth, but before she could speak, Ramirez did something that made everyone in that hallway freeze. He pulled his sidearm. It shouldn't have been possible. The paramedics should have secured it. Protocol demanded it. But Gunnery Sergeant Cole Ramirez had been a Marine for 15 years, and Marines don't give up their weapons easily. He must have hidden it, kept it close, and now the Beretta M9 was in his trembling hand, not pointed at anyone but present. A statement. Ghost stays, he said again. Blood flecked his lips. Or nobody touches me. The ER exploded into controlled pandemonium. Security. Security. Castellanos backed up 3 steps, his coffee cup hitting the floor and shattering. Brown liquid spread across white tile like a stain of cowardice. 2 security guards came running, hands on their pepper spray. Everyone stay calm, the older guard shouted, but his voice cracked on the last word. Sarah didn't move. She stood perfectly still, her eyes on Ramirez, reading him, the way she'd learned to read dying men in places that had no names on any official map. He wasn't a threat. He was terrified. Not of dying Marines made peace with that possibility the day they earned the Eagle Globe and Anchor. No, he was terrified of dying here in this sterile hallway surrounded by people who didn't understand. Who couldn't understand? Cole, she said softly. Just his first name. That was all it took. The gun lowered an inch. Castellanos found his voice again, and with it his outrage. This is completely unacceptable. Mitchell, step away from the patient immediately. Security, disarm him and... Sir. The younger paramedic interrupted his eyes on the cardiac monitor they'd strapped to Ramirez's chest. Blood pressure's dropping, 80/40 and falling. We're losing him. Ramirez's hands started to shake harder. The gun wavered. Cole. Sarah took one step closer. It's okay. I'm here. I've got you. You don't understand, Ramirez gasped. Kandahar, you saved. I know. Sarah's voice was steady now, falling into a cadence she hadn't used in years. Command voice, combat voice. The voice that had talked men through hell and brought them out the other side. I know what happened in Kandahar. I was there. And I'm here now. The gun clattered to the floor. Castellanos moved fast, then snatching up the weapon and handing it to security like it was contaminated. That's assault with a deadly weapon. I want police here. I want a full psychiatric evaluation, and I want this, he jabbed a finger at Sarah. This nurse removed from my ER immediately. No. The word came from behind them, sharp and absolute. Everyone turned. Admiral Richard Keller stood in the emergency entrance, rain dripping from his service dress blues, 3 stars gleaming on his shoulder boards. He was 71 years old, ramrod straight, and he carried the kind of authority that made even men like Castellanos pause. Belay that order, Keller said, walking forward. All of it. Castellanos drew himself up. Admiral, with all due respect, this is my hospital, my ER, and my patient. I don't care what rank you hold in the Navy. That Marine on the gurney is Gunnery Sergeant Cole Ramirez, Force Reconnaissance, recently returned from a classified operation in Yemen. Keller's voice could have cut steel. He was shot protecting a high-value asset extraction. And if he says he wants Nurse Mitchell in that trauma bay, then Nurse Mitchell will be in that trauma bay. Are we clear, Doctor? The silence that followed could have swallowed the world. Castellanos' face went through several interesting colors before settling on a mottled red. Admiral, I appreciate the military's loyalty to its own, but this is a medical facility. We have protocols, credentials matter. This nurse has more trauma experience than everyone in this ER combined, Keller interrupted. But you wouldn't know that, would you? Because you never asked. You never looked past the scrubs in the night shift in the quiet way she keeps her head down. Sarah felt something crack open inside her chest. No, not here, not now, not like this. Admiral Keller, her voice came out strangled. Please don't. But Ramirez was fading, his blood pressure dropping into the danger zone, and there was no more time for secrets. Keller looked at her and his eyes were kind. They need to know Sarah. He needs you to be who you really are. Just for tonight, just to save his life. Castellanos looked between them, confusion and anger warring on his face. Someone want to tell me what the hell is going on here? The older security guard cleared his throat. Doc, the Admiral called her Sarah. So her badge says Sarah Mitchell. The guard pointed. But Ghost, that's not a name, that's a call sign. Understanding hit the room in waves. The younger paramedic went pale. Oh my God, Ghost. The Ghost from the SEAL teams. Not SEAL, Keller corrected quietly. She was never officially a SEAL. Women weren't allowed in special operations back then. But she deployed with SEAL Team 6 as their combat medic for 8 years. 16 tours across 4 continents. They called her Ghost because she could slip into hot zones, save lives in the middle of firefights, and disappear before the enemy even knew she was there. Sarah closed her eyes. The secret she'd buried, the life she'd run from, now exposed under the fluorescent lights of a hospital ER. Castellanos laughed. Actually laughed. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. You expect me to believe that this night nurse is some kind of military legend? I expect you to get the hell out of her way, Keller snapped, before your pride kills a good Marine. Ramirez's eyes rolled back. The cardiac monitor screamed. Sarah didn't think. She moved. 18 months of being invisible, of being quiet, of being less than she was, it all burned away in an instant. She grabbed the gurney rail and started moving, her voice snapping out orders with the precision of someone who coordinated battlefield medicine under enemy fire. Bay 1, now I need O-negative blood, 4 units in a central line kit. Someone page anesthesia and tell them we're going to surgery in 10 minutes. The nurses scattered to obey. Not because they understood, but because something in her voice made it impossible not to. Castellanos sputtered, "You can't just, doctor." Keller's hand landed on Castellanos' shoulder. Not hard, just firm enough to stop him. My advice, stand back and watch a master work. They wheeled Ramirez into Trauma Bay 1, and Sarah's hands moved with the kind of muscle memory that 18 months away couldn't erase. She'd kept her EMT certification current, couldn't help herself, couldn't let go of that last thread. But this was different. This was coming home to something she'd tried so hard to leave behind. "Talk to me, Cole." She cut away his tactical vest with trauma shears, exposing the sucking chest wound. "Tell me about Kandahar. Tell me about that day." Ramirez's eyes fluttered open. You don't remember." "I remember every single one of you." Sarah's hands flew across his body, assessing, cataloging, prioritizing. "But I need you to stay with me. Stay awake. Talk to me." "IED," he whispered. "Convoy. Ambush. You came out of nowhere. Literally, nowhere. We thought you were a hallucination, angel, or ghost." A nurse Sarah didn't recognize appeared at her elbow with the blood. Good, they were listening. "Martinez was dying." Ramirez continued, his voice getting weaker. "Femoral artery. You put your hand inside his leg. Held the artery. 20 minutes. Until the medevac." Sarah hung the blood and started the transfusion. "Martinez made it home. He's in Virginia now, 3 kids. Because of you. Because he was strong. Like you're going to be." She looked up at the nurse. "I need pressure on the shoulder wound. Firm, steady, don't let up." The nurse moved immediately. Castellanos stood in the doorway watching. Just watching. His face had gone from red to pale to something else entirely. Something that might have been the first stirrings of Dawoud. Sarah worked in a rhythm that felt both foreign and familiar, her hands remembering what her mind had tried to forget. Stop the bleeding, secure the airway, stabilize the spine. The ABCs of trauma medicine practiced in places where mistakes meant body bags. Then she got to the leg wound. Her hands froze. "Oh no." The words escaped before she could stop them. "What?" Castellanos pushed into the room. "What's wrong?" "No, Sarah didn't answer. She was staring at the tourniquet the paramedics had applied to Ramirez's thigh, standard issue, properly positioned, everything by the book, and completely wrong for this specific injury. "Mitchell," Castellanos' voice had lost some of its edge. "What do you see?" She pointed to the slight bulge above the tourniquet, the almost imperceptible discoloration spreading up toward the hip. The bullet didn't just hit his thigh, it tracked upward, probably nicked the femoral artery higher than they thought. "The tourniquet's too low. It's creating a false compartment. Blood's pooling in his upper leg and hip, and we can't see it because it's internal." Castellanos leaned in, his eyes narrowing. For the first time since Sarah had met him, he actually looked instead of just seeing what he expected to see. "Jesus," he breathed. "You're right. How did you—" "Seen it before." Sarah was already moving her hands steady despite the memories flooding back. "Fallujah 2007, Marine named Jackson. We almost lost him because we didn't catch it in time." She grabbed a fresh tourniquet from the supply cart. Castellanos put his hand on her arm. "Wait, if you move that first tourniquet before the second one's in place, he'll bleed out in 90 seconds, I know." Sarah looked him dead in the eye. "Which is why you're going to trust me, doctor, because I've done this in the back of a moving Humvee under mortar fire. I think I can handle it in a sterile trauma bay." For a long moment, Castellanos didn't move. Pride warred with common sense across his face. Pride had been winning for 48 years of his life. Common sense won today. He stepped back. Sarah positioned the new tourniquet higher on Ramirez's leg, her left hand ready to apply direct pressure the second she released the old one. On 3, 1, 2, 3. She moved with the kind of speed that only comes from practice, measured in lives saved and lives lost. Release. Pressure. Tighten. Lock. 5 seconds, maybe 6. The cardiac monitor, which had been screaming warnings, suddenly steadied. Blood pressures started to climb, slowly, then faster. Ramirez sucked in a breath that was deeper, stronger. Pressures stabilizing, the nurse monitoring vitals called out. 90/50, 95/55, holding steady. Sarah didn't move. She kept her hands on Ramirez, kept her focus absolute, but something in her chest loosened just slightly. Behind her, she heard Castellanos exhale. That was, he paused, that was exceptional work. Sarah didn't acknowledge the compliment. Couldn't, because Ramirez was looking at her again, his eyes clearer now that blood was actually reaching his brain. Told them, he whispered. Told them Ghost would save me, just like before. Save your strength, Marine. But Sarah's voice was gentle. You've got a long recovery ahead. Will you be here? The question hit her like a physical blow. Would she? Could she? This was exactly what she'd been running from. The recognition, the expectation, the weight of being someone she wasn't sure she could be anymore. Before she could answer, Admiral Keller spoke from the doorway. She'll be here, Gunny. I'll make sure of it. Sarah's head snapped up. Admiral, we'll talk later. Keller's tone left no room for argument. Right now, this Marine needs surgery. Dr. Castellanos. Castellanos seemed to shake himself out of a daze. Yes, of course. Or two should be ready. I'll scrub in personally. He paused, then looked at Sarah. Would you be willing to assist? Every eye in the trauma bay turned to her. Sarah looked down at Ramirez, at this Marine who'd refused to let anyone else touch him, who'd pulled a gun in a hospital ER just to make sure the person he trusted was the one keeping him alive. She thought about Martinez in Virginia with his 3 kids, about Jackson from Fallujah who'd sent her a Christmas card every year until she'd changed her address and stopped forwarding her mail. About all the others, the ones who'd made it and the ones who hadn't, and the impossible weight of being the difference between those two outcomes. I'm a floor nurse, Dr. Castellanos, she said quietly. I'm not credentialed for OR work at this facility. I'll credential you. Admiral Keller stepped into the room. As of right now, consider yourself on temporary active duty as a civilian consultant to the United States Navy. Your credentials are reactivated, your clearance is reinstated, and you have full authority to practice combat medicine in support of military personnel. Dr. Castellanos, is that sufficient for your hospital's legal requirements? Castellanos blinked. Yes, I believe so. I'll need to check with administration, but given the circumstances, Keller interrupted, you have a critically wounded Marine who specifically requested her care. I suggest you make it work, Doctor. The tension in the room ratcheted up another notch. Sarah felt trapped, cornered. The quiet life she'd built, the anonymity she'd wrapped around herself like armor, it was all crumbling. And standing in the doorway was an admiral who'd been her commanding officer a lifetime ago, who knew exactly which buttons to push, who understood that she couldn't say no when a Marine's life was on the line. Damn him. Damn him for being right. Fine. The word came out harder than she intended. But this is just for tonight, just for him. After that, Admiral, you and I are going to have a very long conversation about boundaries. Keller had the grace to look slightly chastened. Agreed. They prepped Ramirez for transport to the OR, moving with the efficient choreography of a team that was starting to sync up despite themselves. Sarah found herself giving orders and having them followed, not because of her rank, she had none, but because everyone in that room had just watched her do something their head trauma surgeon had missed. As they wheeled Ramirez toward the elevator, he grabbed Sarah's hand one more time. Thank you, he said, for not staying hidden, for being Ghost. One more time. Sarah squeezed his hand. Get through surgery, Cole, then you can thank me. The elevator doors closed, and just like that, the trauma bay was empty except for Sarah Castellanos and the evidence of what had just happened, blood on the floor, discarded medical packaging, the faint smell of fear and adrenaline that never quite leaves a room where someone almost died. Castellanos turned to her, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked uncertain. I owe you an apology. You owe me nothing. Sarah stripped off her gloves and tossed them in the biohazard bin. You're a good surgeon, Dr. Castellanos. You saved lives, that's all that matters. But I didn't see. You saw what 99% of trauma surgeons would have seen. The tourniquet was properly placed according to every protocol we teach. Sarah met his eyes. I've just seen the 1%, the exceptions, the things that don't make it into textbooks because they only happen in places where the textbooks don't reach. Castellanos was quiet for a long moment. How many, he finally asked. How many tours did you do? 16? And how many did you lose? The question hung in the air between them, sharp and terrible. Sarah turned away. I need to scrub in. We should get upstairs. Mitchell, Sarah, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have. 37. Her voice was flat, emotionless. The only way she could say the number out loud. I lost 37 out of... I stopped counting after 1,000, maybe more. Probably more. But 37 is the number I remember. The ones I couldn't save. The ones who died with my hands on them, my voice in their ear, my promises that they'd make it home. She walked to the door, then stopped. That's why I work nights, Dr. Castellanos. That's why I keep my head down. That's why I don't want anyone to know who I was. Because Ghost saved hundreds of lives, but she couldn't save them all. And I'm not sure I know how to be her anymore without remembering the ones she failed. She left him standing there, surrounded by the debris of a life saved and a secret exposed. Upstairs in OR2, they were prepping for surgery. Sarah scrubbed her hands at the sink, watching the water run clear, thinking about how many times she'd done this in field hospitals, where the water ran brown, where the soap was rationed, where sterile was a hopeful suggestion rather than a guaranteed reality. A surgical nurse appeared beside her. Dr. Castellanos wants you to know he's ready when you are. Sarah nodded, but as she reached for the towel to dry her hands, she caught sight of her reflection in the metal paper towel dispenser. 42 years old, gray starting at her temples, lines around her eyes that hadn't been there when she'd retired. She looked tired. She looked like someone who'd been running for a very long time. Behind her reflection, she could see the OR through the window. Ramirez on the table, the surgical team moving with purpose. Dr. Castellanos checking the monitors one last time. And she realized something that made her breath catch. She'd missed this. God help her, she'd actually missed this. Not the war, not the death, not the constant fear and exhaustion and moral injury that came from making life and death decisions with insufficient information and inadequate resources. But this, the focused intensity of saving a life, the privilege of being trusted with someone's survival, the profound connection that happens when you become the thin line between a person and the darkness waiting to swallow them whole. She'd buried it, suppressed it, tried to kill it with 18 months of routine floor nursing and deliberate invisibility. But it had never really gone away. Sarah pushed through the OR doors, her hands raised freshly scrubbed. A surgical nurse helped her into a gown and gloves. Castellanos looked up from where he was examining Ramirez's shoulder wound. Ready, he asked. Sarah positioned herself across the table from him, her eyes on the damaged tissue, her mind already running through the steps they'd need to take. Debride the wound track, repair the vascular damage, remove the bullet fragments, close in layers. All while keeping Ramirez stable, keeping him alive, keeping the promise she'd made in that trauma bay. Ready, she said, and for the first time in 18 months, Sarah Mitchell stopped running from who she used to be. The surgery took 4 hours. 4 hours of intense, delicate work that required every bit of skill both she and Castellanos possessed. The shoulder wound was relatively straightforward, through and through, no major vascular involvement, just muscle and tissue damage that would heal. The abdominal wound was trickier. The bullet had nicked his small intestine and caused some internal bleeding, but nothing they couldn't repair. Castellanos worked with steady hands, and Sarah found herself respecting his technical precision, even as she silently corrected his approach a few times with strategic instrument placements that guided him toward better angles. He noticed, she could tell by the slight pause before he adjusted his technique, but he didn't say anything, just adapted and moved on. The leg was where Sarah took over completely. The bullet had indeed tracked upward, just as she'd suspected, creating a complex wound channel that threatened the femoral artery. She worked with the kind of focused calm that came from muscle memory, older than conscious thought, her hands steady as she dissected through damaged tissue, isolated the injured vessel, and repaired it with sutures so precise they looked like artwork. Castellanos watched in silence for a while, then quietly asked, "Where did you learn that technique?" Ramstein Air Base, Germany, Trauma Conference 2009. Vascular surgeon named Dr. Elizabeth Chen. She developed it for combat injuries in Iraq. Sarah didn't look up from her work. Most people don't remember her. She died in a helicopter crash 6 months later, coming back from a field hospital in Afghanistan. But you remembered. I remember everyone who taught me how to save lives. Sarah tied off the last suture, because their knowledge didn't die with them. It lives on in every patient I save using what they taught me. The anesthesiologist called out vitals. Pressure's holding steady at 110/70, heart rate 72, oxygen saturation 98%. He's stable. Castellanos nodded. Let's close him up. They worked together to close the wounds layer by layer, and Sarah felt something shift between them. Not friendship, not yet, but a mutual respect born from shared purpose. As they finished, Castellanos stepped back and pulled down his mask. Thank you, he said simply, for pushing back, for being right, for saving his life. Sarah stripped off her gloves. We saved his life, doctor. Together. That's how it's supposed to work. Is it? Castellanos' voice was bitter. Because I've spent 10 years being the smartest person in the room, the one with all the answers, and tonight a night nurse saw something I completely missed. That's humbling. Good. Sarah met his eyes. Humility keeps us sharp. Arrogance kills patience. You're a brilliant surgeon, Dr. Castellanos. But brilliance without the ability to listen, that's just ego with a medical degree. She walked out of the OR before he could respond, suddenly exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with the physical demands of surgery. This was the soul-deep weariness of having your carefully constructed walls torn down, of being seen when you'd worked so hard to stay invisible. Admiral Keller was waiting in the surgical wing's family area. He stood when she entered, his uniform still crisp despite the late hour, or early hour. Sarah had lost track of time, somewhere between the trauma bay and the OR. How is he? Keller asked. Stable. Critical but stable. He'll need ICU monitoring for at least 48 hours, but barring complications, he should make a full recovery. Keller nodded. Good. That's good. He paused. We need to talk Sarah. No, we really don't. Sarah kept walking, heading for the locker room where she'd left her street clothes a lifetime ago. Keller followed. You can't keep running. Watch me. Sarah, she spun on him so fast he actually took a step back. You had no right, Admiral, no right to expose me like that. I left that life behind. I earned the right to leave it behind. And you just threw me back into it without my consent. A Marine was dying. And I saved him, just like I saved all the others. But that doesn't mean you get to make decisions about my life. Her voice cracked on the last word and she hated herself for it. I'm done, Admiral. I did my time. I gave everything I had to give. I earned my peace. Keller's expression softened. Did you, though, find peace? The question hit her like a gut punch. Working night shifts where nobody knows your name, Keller continued gently. Hiding your skills, your experience, everything that makes you extraordinary. Is that really peace, Sarah? Or is it just another kind of prison? It's my prison, my choice, oh boy. Sarah's hands were shaking. And you took that choice away from me tonight. No. Keller shook his head. Ramirez took that choice away when he called for Ghost. I just made sure you could answer. The rest? That's up to you. Sarah wanted to scream, wanted to rage at the unfairness of it all, at the way her past kept reaching out to drag her back, at the impossible burden of being someone people depended on when she was so tired of carrying the weight. Instead, she took a breath, then another. What do you want from me, Admiral? Keller pulled a folder from his briefcase. Read this. Take your time, but read it. Sarah took the folder, her hands still trembling slightly. What is it? An offer, a proposal, a way forward that doesn't require you to be Ghost, but doesn't ask you to waste everything Ghost learned either. He turned to leave, then paused. That Marine in there survived because of skills you developed in 8 years of combat deployments. Skills that no medical school teaches. Skills that are dying with the generation of medics in corpsmen who learned them in Iraq and Afghanistan. We're losing that knowledge, Sarah. And with it, we're losing lives we could save. He left her standing there holding the folder, feeling the weight of words she hadn't yet read. Sarah looked through the window into the ICU where they were settling Ramirez into a bed, hooking him up to monitors, making him as comfortable as possible. He was alive. Against odds, against injuries that should have killed him, he was alive. Because she'd been there. Because she'd remembered. Because Ghost for one more night had saved someone who needed saving. Sarah closed her eyes and felt the tears come, tears she'd been holding back for 18 months, maybe longer. Tears for the life she'd left behind, for the woman she'd tried to stop being, for all the impossible choices that had led her to this moment. When she opened her eyes again, dawn was breaking through the windows of Mercy Heights Medical Center. A new day, a new choice. Sarah tucked the folder under her arm and headed for the locker room, exhausted, emotionally raw, and more uncertain about her future than she'd been in years. But for the first time in 18 months, she felt something other than numb resignation. She felt alive. Sarah tasted copper. Her tongue found the split in her lip where Castellanos' ring had caught flesh. She should have been shocked, should have been outraged, should have filed an assault report before his hand even dropped back to his side. But all she could hear was that one word echoing through the ER: ghost. The Marine Ramirez was seizing, now his body arching off the gurney, the monitors screaming their digital panic into air that had gone thick with tension. His eyes rolled back, whites showing, but his hands still clawed at empty space, reaching for something only he could see. "Someone restrain him before he hurts himself," Castellanos barked, already moving past Sarah like she was furniture. Like the violence he'd just committed was already forgotten, irrelevant, beneath acknowledgement. Sarah's cheek throbbed. Her wrist ached where he'd twisted it, but her hands weren't shaking anymore. They were steady, perfectly, absolutely steady. She pushed off the wall and walked straight back toward the gurney. "Mitchell, I swear to God, Castellanos started. "A ghost!" Ramirez gasped again. His hand found Sarah's scrub top and fisted in the fabric with desperate strength. "Please, ghost, they said you were here. They said—" "Cole!" Sarah's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Not loud, not harsh, just absolute. "Look at me." The seizing stopped, not gradually, instantly, like someone had flipped a switch in Ramirez's brain. His eyes found hers. "There you are," Sarah said quietly. "Stay with me, Marine. Eyes on me. Nowhere else." "You're real." Ramirez's voice cracked. "I thought, the morphine, I thought I was hallucinating again." "I'm real. I'm here. And you're going to be fine." Castellanos grabbed Sarah's shoulder, spinning her around. "I told you to get away from—" Admiral Keller's voice cracked like a gunshot. "Dr. Castellanos, touch her one more time, and I will have you arrested for assault on a military consultant. Do you understand me?" The ER had gone silent. Every nurse, every tech, every patient in the waiting area who could see through the glass walls, everyone was watching. Castellanos' hand dropped. His face had gone from purple to white rage, bleeding into something that might have been the first whisper of fear. "Military consultant," he repeated. "What the hell are you talking about?" Keller stepped forward, his service dress blue still dripping rainwater onto the sterile floor. "Nurse Sarah Mitchell is currently operating under emergency recall to active duty status as a civilian medical consultant to the United States Navy. She holds the equivalent rank of lieutenant commander and has full authority to provide medical care to military personnel. Your assault on her person is a federal offense." Sarah's stomach dropped. "Admiral, I never agreed to—" "The paperwork was filed 3 hours ago." Keller continued, pulling a document from inside his coat. "When we got word that Gunnery Sergeant Ramirez was being transported to this facility with critical injuries and specifically requesting you by call sign, I invoked emergency consultation protocols." "That's impossible." Castellanos snatched the paper from Keller's hands. "You can't just— This is a civilian hospital. You can't just activate military authority and—" "Actually, doctor, I can. The Veterans Healthcare Act of 2018 allows for emergency military medical consultation in civilian facilities when a service member's life is at risk and they specifically request care from qualified military medical personnel." Keller's voice was ice. "I suggest you read the section I've highlighted, particularly the part about legal protections for consultants and criminal penalties for interference with their duties." Sarah felt the room tilting. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. She'd left the military 4 years ago. She'd walked away clean, honorable discharge, all ties severed. Keller couldn't just drag her back into Ramirez's grip on her scrubs tightened. "Please," he whispered. "Please don't leave. They said Ghost could fix anything. They said if anyone could save me, it was you." Sarah looked down at him. Really looked. He couldn't have been more than 28. Baby face under the blood and pain. Wedding ring on his left hand. Dog tags that read his blood type and religious preference. Protestant, A+. Ramirez Cole M., someone's husband, someone's son, someone who'd been told a legend about a medic called Ghost who could pull dying men back from the edge, and he'd believed it enough to refuse treatment from anyone else. The weight of that belief settled onto Sarah's shoulders like a rucksack full of stones. Dr. Castellanos, Sarah's voice came out flat, emotionless. The voice she'd used in Kandahar and Fallujah, in a dozen places whose names were still classified. You have two choices. You can let me assess this patient and provide recommendations for his care, or you can watch him die while you waste time arguing about jurisdiction. Are you threatening me? I'm stating facts. His blood pressure is dropping. The tourniquet on his leg is placed incorrectly for the wound pattern I'm seeing. And if you don't start hanging O negative in the next 90 seconds, he's going to code right here in your ER. Sarah held his gaze. Your choice, doctor. Ego or life. Pick one. The seconds stretched out like taffy. Then Castellanos threw the paper at Keller's chest. Fine. But I'm filing a formal complaint with the hospital board, the state medical society, and every regulatory agency I can think of. This is completely noted. Sarah was already moving her hands on Ramirez's leg, assessing the tourniquet placement. Someone get me a fresh CAT, tourniquet, a pressure dressing, and 4 units of O negative. Now the nurse is scattered. The younger paramedic who'd brought Ramirez in stepped forward. Ma'am, I placed that tourniquet according to protocol. I know. You did everything right. Sarah's fingers traced the wound path, feeling for the things that couldn't be seen. But this isn't a standard GSW. The bullet entered here. She pointed to the entry wound mid-thigh, but it didn't exit. Feel this. She guided the paramedic's hand to a spot 6 inches higher just below Ramirez's hip. His eyes went wide. Is that the bullet fragment? Maybe the whole round if we're lucky. It tracked up instead of through. The tourniquet stopped the external bleeding, but there's an arterial injury above it that's bleeding into the muscle compartment. We can't see it because the skin isn't broken, but it's there. Castellanos pushed in beside them. How can you possibly know that without imaging? Sarah didn't answer. She was counting pulse points, feeling for the subtle differences in temperature and tension that separated normal tissue from tissue filling with blood it shouldn't contain. Palpation, Admiral Keller said quietly from behind them. She's reading the wound by touch. It's a skill that can't be taught in medical school, doctor. It has to be learned in the field, one dying soldier at a time. A nurse returned with the supplies. Sarah took the fresh tourniquet and positioned it higher on Ramirez's thigh. This is going to hurt, she told the Marine, but I need you to stay still. Can you do that for me? Ramirez nodded, his jaw clenched. Sarah released the lower tourniquet and immediately applied pressure with her left hand while her right secured the new one. The transition took maybe 4 seconds. 4 seconds during which Ramirez's femoral artery pumped blood exactly where Sarah's hand waited to catch it. She tightened the new tourniquet with practiced efficiency. Ramirez screamed. The sound cut through the ER like broken glass, raw and animal and wrong. I know, I've got you, Sarah murmured, her hand steady on his shoulder, even as she cranked the tourniquet tighter. Almost done, stay with me, Cole. Eyes on me. The bleeding stopped. The monitor's alarm changed pitch, not quieter, but different. Blood pressure stabilizing instead of dropping. Castellanos stared at the monitors like they'd personally betrayed him. The placement was textbook. How did you? Textbook works for textbook wounds. Sarah was already assessing Ramirez's other injuries, her hands moving with the efficiency of someone who'd done this too many times to count. But bullets don't read textbooks. They do whatever physics and bad luck tell them to do. You learn to read the signs. She found the abdominal wound entry point just below the ribs, no exit wound. Her fingers probed gently around the area, feeling for rigidity, for the telltale signs of internal bleeding. Possible bowel perforation, she said. Definitely some internal bleeding, but it's not catastrophic yet. The shoulder wound is through and through, probably missed major vessels. He's lucky. Lucky. The older paramedic laughed, but it was edged with hysteria. Ma'am, he took 3 rounds at close range, and he's still breathing. That's lucky. Sarah looked up at Castellanos. He needs surgery. Now. Not in an hour, not after we run every scan in the book. Now, because that abdominal wound is on a timer, and when it goes critical, we'll lose him. Castellanos' professional pride warred with what he was seeing on the monitors. I need CT scans to plan surgical approach. I need to know exactly what we're dealing with. You're dealing with a Marine who's bleeding internally and getting weaker by the minute. Sarah's voice hardened. You want scans, fine, but you do them in OR with a surgical team standing by, and the second he starts to decompensate, you open him up. Because if you wait for perfect information, you'll get a perfect autopsy instead of a live patient. The two of them locked eyes across Ramirez's body. You're awfully confident for someone who hasn't practiced trauma surgery in 4 years, Castellanos said. I practiced trauma medicine in places where the ER was a tent, and the OR was wherever we could find flat ground and enough light to see what we were doing. I've performed emergency surgery in the back of helicopters, in blown-out buildings and ditches, while mortars landed close enough to taste the dirt they kicked up. Sarah leaned forward. So yes, doctor, I'm confident, because I've kept people alive with less than what you have in this ER right now. Keller cleared his throat. Perhaps we could save the measuring contest for after the Marine's life is no longer hanging in the balance. Castellanos jerked like he'd been slapped. Color flooded back into his face, not the purple of rage this time, but red embarrassment. Of course, you're right. He turned to the nurses. Prep OR2, full trauma team. And get radiology down here with a portable scanner. We'll do preliminary imaging en route. He looked back at Sarah. Will that satisfy your concerns, Nurse Mitchell? The title was deliberate, a small cruelty to reassert hierarchy. Sarah let it pass. It'll do. They started moving the organized chaos of a trauma team that had done this dance before. Ramirez was transferred to a transport gurney. Lines were checked. Medications were pushed. The machinery of emergency medicine ground into motion. Sarah found herself walking alongside the gurney, Ramirez's hand finding hers again. You're coming with me, right? His voice was small, scared in a way that had nothing to do with bullets and everything to do with the kind of fear that lived in the quiet spaces between heartbeats. To surgery, you'll be there. Sarah opened her mouth to say no, to say she'd done her part, stabilized him, got him ready for the real doctors to take over. To say she was just a floor nurse who'd happened to be in the right place at the right time. But Admiral Keller was watching, and something in his eyes, not commanding, not ordering, just asking, made the words stick in her throat. I'll be there, she heard herself saying. I promise. They loaded Ramirez into the elevator. Sarah stepped in beside him. Castellanos followed along with 2 nurses and an anesthesiologist, whose name Sarah didn't know. The doors closed and suddenly the space was too small, too quiet, too intimate. So, the anesthesiologist said, his voice carefully neutral. Ghost, huh? That's quite a call sign. Sarah didn't answer. I served, he continued, Army Medic Iraq 2004 to 2007. Never deployed with SEALs, but we heard stories. About a woman who could do things that shouldn't be possible. Save people who should have died. Disappear into hot zones and come back with wounded that everyone else had written off as KIA. Stories get exaggerated, Sarah said. Do they? He smiled slightly. Because I heard about a medic who walked into a building in Sadr City that was under active fire, found 6 wounded Marines who'd been trapped for 3 hours and got all 6 out alive. They said she set up a triage station in a room with no roof while insurgents were literally shooting at her from the building next door. They said she sang to the wounded while she worked. Christmas carols in July because one of the Marines was scared, and it was the only thing she could think of to calm him down. Sarah's hands clenched. That was a long time ago. 7 years. I remember because it was all over the combat medical community. We studied the after-action report, the techniques you use, the improvised equipment, the way you prioritize care in a dynamic threat environment. The anesthesiologist's smile faded. 3 of those Marines were at my hospital in Germany when they medevaced them out. I helped treat them, and every single one of them said the same thing: Ghost saved us. The elevator dinged. 2nd floor. OR suite. The doors opened and the spell broke. They wheeled Ramirez toward OR2, past walls covered in motivation posters about teamwork and excellence, past a nurse's station where someone had left a half-eaten sandwich and a coffee going cold. Normal. Everything looked so normal. Sarah felt like she was watching it through glass. In the OR prep area, they transferred Ramirez to the surgical table. The anesthesiologist started his assessment, checking airways, discussing sedation protocols with Castellanos. Sarah stood back, suddenly aware that she didn't belong here. She was wearing floor scrubs, not surgical gear. She hadn't scrubbed in. She wasn't part of the surgical team. She'd made a promise she had no authority to keep. Mitchell, Castellanos' voice was clipped. If you're staying, you need to scrub properly. I run a sterile OR. It wasn't an invitation. It was a challenge. Sarah looked at Ramirez already being draped, ready disappearing under sterile sheets and clinical efficiency. His eyes found hers one last time before the anesthesia took him. Trust. That's what she saw there, complete absolute trust. Where's the scrub room? Sarah asked. Castellanos pointed. The scrub room was small, just 2 sinks and a wall of brushes and antimicrobial soap. Sarah stood at the sink and started the process she'd done hundreds of times, the methodical, meditative ritual of washing away the outside world. The door opened behind her. A nurse appeared, older woman, maybe 60, with gray hair and sharp eyes. Your ghost. It wasn't a question. Sarah didn't answer, just kept scrubbing. My son deployed with the SEAL Team 3 in 2011. Afghanistan. He was hit by an IED compound, fractures in both legs, severe internal injuries. They said he'd never walk again. The nurse stepped closer. But there was a combat medic at the field hospital who refused to accept that diagnosis, who spent 8 hours in surgery, who invented techniques on the spot because the textbook answers weren't good enough. Who told my son that he'd dance at his wedding if it was the last thing she ever did? Sarah's hands stilled under the running water. He walked me down the aisle at my daughter's wedding 2 months ago. The nurse continued quietly. Because of you. Because Ghost doesn't give up. I don't, Sarah's voice cracked. I'm not that person anymore. Aren't you? The nurse handed Sarah a sterile towel. Because from where I'm standing, you just saved a Marine's life using skills that most doctors in this hospital don't even know exist. Sounds like Ghost to me. She left before Sarah could respond. Sarah dried her hands and stared at her reflection in the metal towel dispenser. Same face she'd seen for 4 years. Same exhaustion around the eyes. Same lines that came from smiling less than she used to. But something else now. Something she'd thought was dead. Purpose. She pushed through into the OR. Castellanos was already gowned and gloved, standing over Ramirez, studying the exposed shoulder wound. He looked up when Sarah entered. You're out of practice, he said. I'll take lad. You assist. Fine. And Mitchell in my OR, I don't care what your call sign used to be. You follow my instructions, my protocols, my decisions. Clear, Sarah met his eyes over her mask. Crystal. It was a lie, and they both knew it. The surgery began. Castellanos worked with the confidence of someone who'd done this procedure 100 times. He was good, Sarah could admit that. His hands were steady, his technique was solid, his knowledge of anatomy was textbook perfect. But textbook didn't account for the ways scar tissue from a previous injury had altered the normal muscle structure in Ramirez's shoulder. Didn't account for the bullet fragment that had lodged against bone in a way that made standard extraction dangerous. Sarah watched Castellanos probe for the fragment, watched him start to apply pressure in a way that would crack the bone if he continued. Doctor, she said quietly, if I could suggest, I've got it. The bone structure is compromised. If you apply pressure from that angle, I said I've got it, Mitchell. Sarah fell silent, watched, waited. Castellanos increased pressure. The bone made a sound like green wood splintering. Ramirez's vitals spiked on the monitors. Damn it! Castellanos pulled back. The fragment's deeper than I thought. It's not deeper, it's laterally displaced by scar tissue. You need to approach from the posterior angle. Sarah kept her voice level, professional. If you go in from where you're positioned, you'll fracture the humerus. Thank you for the anatomy lesson, but I know how to remove a bullet. I'm sure you do. I'm just telling you that this particular bullet in this particular patient requires a different approach. The tension in the OR ratcheted up another notch. The scrub nurse glanced between them nervously. The anesthesiologist checked his monitors and said nothing. Castellanos' jaw worked under his mask. Fine, show me. He stepped back. Sarah moved into position, her hands hovering over the wound for just a moment before she made her first incision. The fragment came out clean. No cracked bone, no additional trauma. Castellanos didn't say anything. Didn't have to. The evidence was right there in the surgical field. They moved to the abdominal wound mode. This was the critical one. This was where Ramirez would live or die. Castellanos opened the abdomen with steady hands, revealing the damage beneath. The bullet had perforated the small intestine in 2 places and nicked the mesenteric artery. "We need to resect the damaged bowel and repair the arterial injury," Castellanos said. "Standard procedure." Sarah looked at the wound pattern, at the way the bullet had traveled, at the angle of entry and the distribution of damage. Something was wrong. "Doctor, before you start resecting—" "Mitchell, please. I've done hundreds of these repairs." "I know, but this bullet traveled at an upward angle. If it hit the intestine here and here," she pointed, "then basic physics says there should be damage to the liver. But I'm not seeing it." Castellanos paused. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting the bullet might still be in there, lodged somewhere we can't see yet. The scans didn't show." "The scans were preliminary and done in motion. We need to explore before we start cutting." For a long moment, Castellanos didn't move. Then with visible effort, he nodded. "All right, we'll explore first." It took 10 minutes of careful dissection. They found the bullet lodged against Ramirez's spine millimeters from the spinal cord, hidden behind a fold of tissue that wouldn't have shown up clearly on the hasty scans they'd done. If Castellanos had started the resection without finding it, if the tissue had shifted, if the bullet had moved even slightly, Ramirez would have been paralyzed. Or dead. The OR was completely silent except for the beep of monitors and the whisper of the ventilator. "My God," Castellanos breathed. "How did you know?" "I didn't know, I suspected. Because I've seen what bullets do when they hit bone at certain angles and the damage pattern didn't match." Sarah's voice was steady, but inside her heart was hammering. "It was just a guess that saved this man's life." Castellanos looked at her, and for the first time there was no arrogance in his eyes. Just respect. "I would have missed it." "Maybe. Maybe not." "No, I would have missed it. I was so focused on following the protocol, on doing what I've always done, that I would have killed him." His hands were shaking now, slightly but visibly. "Jesus Christ." "Dr. Castellanos," Sarah's voice was firm, "you didn't kill him because you listened. Because when someone with different experience offered a perspective you didn't have, you set aside your ego and listened. That's not weakness, that's wisdom." The shaking stopped. Castellanos took a breath, then another. "Let's finish this." They worked together for the next 3 hours, removing the bullet, repairing the arterial damage, resecting and reconnecting the damaged intestine. It was delicate, precise work that required both of them, Castellanos' technical skill and Sarah's combat-honed instincts, working in tandem. By the time they closed, Sarah's back was screaming and her hands were cramping. But Ramirez was alive, stable, going to make it. In the scrub room afterward, Castellanos pulled off his mask and looked at Sarah. "I owe you an apology," he said. "Several, actually." "You don't—" "I do? For hitting you? For dismissing you? For letting my pride almost kill a patient?" He met her eyes. "And for not seeing what was right in front of me for 18 months. You're not just a good nurse, Sarah. You're an exceptional trauma specialist, and I've been too arrogant to notice." Sarah pulled off her own mask. "We're all learning, doctor. That's the job." "Maybe, but some of us need to learn humility more than others." He offered his hand. "Thank you for being better than I deserve tonight." Sarah shook his hand. "He's alive. That's all that matters." She left him in the scrub room and walked out into the quiet hallway beyond. The adrenaline was fading now, leaving behind the bone-deep exhaustion that always followed combat medicine. Even when the combat was in a sterile OR instead of a dusty field hospital. Admiral Keller was waiting in the hallway. "You did good work in there," he said. "I did my job." "You did Ghost's job, and you did it brilliantly." Keller fell into step beside her as she walked toward the elevator. "That folder I gave you, did you read it yet?" "Haven't had time." "Make time. Because what you did tonight, Sarah, that's what we're losing. That's the knowledge and skill that's disappearing as combat medics retire and the lessons of Iraq and Afghanistan fade into history." Sarah stopped walking. "I can't go back, Admiral. I can't deploy again. I don't have that in me anymore." "I'm not asking you to deploy. I'm asking you to teach." Keller's voice was gentle. "To take everything Ghost learned and pass it on to the next generation before it's lost." The elevator arrived. Sarah stepped in. "Read the folder," Keller said as the door started to close. "That's all I ask." The door shut, leaving Sarah alone with her reflection in the polished steel and the weight of decisions she wasn't ready to make. Sarah made it to the staff locker room before her hands started shaking. Not the controlled tremor of exhaustion. This was different. This was the kind of shaking that came from 4 years of carefully constructed walls crumbling in a single night. She gripped the edge of the sink and stared at her reflection in the mirror, still wearing surgical scrubs that weren't hers, still wearing the weight of a call sign she tried to bury. The door banged open behind her. "There you are." Jennifer Rios, the night-charge nurse, stood in the doorway with her arms crossed. She was 45, no nonsense, and had been at Mercy Heights for 20 years. "Want to tell me what the hell just happened in my ER?" Sarah turned on the faucet, buying time. "A trauma case, that's all." "That's all?" Jennifer's voice climbed an octave. "Marcus Castellanos, the Marcus Castellanos who thinks nurses exist solely to admire his genius, just came down to the nursing station and told me, and I quote, 'Sarah Mitchell is the finest trauma specialist I have ever worked with. He wants you permanently assigned to his surgical team.'" The water ran cold over Sarah's hands. She scrubbed harder, washing away blood that was already gone. "He also told me that he assaulted you, that he struck you in front of witnesses, and the hospital needs to conduct a full investigation." Jennifer stepped closer. "Sarah, he hit you. Why didn't you say anything?" "Because a Marine was dying." "So you just, ignored it?" "Let it go." Jennifer grabbed Sarah's shoulder and turned her around, forcing eye contact. "Show me." Sarah's lip had stopped bleeding, but the split was visible. Her cheek was starting to bruise where Castellanos' palm had connected. Jennifer's expression went from concern to furious in half a heartbeat. "That son of a bitch. I'm calling HR right now. I'm calling the police. You're going to do nothing." Sarah's voice was flat. "It's handled." "Handled? You call this handled?" Jennifer gestured at Sarah's face. "He assaulted you. That's a crime. You could press charges. You could sue. I could make it into a circus that helps nobody." Sarah pulled away and opened her locker, reaching for her street clothes. "Castellanos made a mistake. He apologized. He's facing consequences." "That's enough." "The hell it is?" But Jennifer's voice had lost some of its heat. She leaned against the lockers, studying Sarah with eyes that had seen too many nurses eaten alive by hospital politics. "Who are you, E?" The question hung in the air between them. "I'm nobody, just a night nurse who was in the right place at the right time." "Bullshit. I've worked with you for 18 months, Sarah. You're good, really good. But what I saw on those security monitors tonight," Jennifer shook her head, "that wasn't good. That was something else entirely. That was someone who's seen things the rest of us can't even imagine." Sarah pulled off her scrub top, revealing the scars she usually kept hidden. A long white line across her left shoulder blade, shrapnel from a mortar that had landed 10 feet away. 3 puckered circles on her lower back, bullet fragments from friendly fire in a firefight outside Mosul. The burn scar on her right forearm from a fuel explosion that had taken out half a convoy. Jennifer went quiet. "I did 4 years in the Army," Sarah said, pulling on her street clothes. "Medical Corps, trauma specialist. That's all you need to know." It was a lie and they both knew it. But Jennifer was smart enough not to push. "Does this mean you're leaving us, going to work with Castellanos in trauma?" Sarah slammed her locker shut harder than necessary. "I'm not going anywhere. I'm finishing my shift, going home, and forgetting this night ever happened." She walked out before Jennifer could respond. The hospital hallways were quieter now, the deep night lull between emergencies when even crisis took a breath. Sarah's feet carried her toward the ICU without conscious decision. She told herself she was just checking on Ramirez. Standard follow-up, nothing more. The ICU was dimly lit, machines beeping their steady rhythms. Ramirez was in bed, 3 still intubated, still sedated, but his vitals were strong. Sarah stood at the foot of his bed and watched his chest rise and fall with mechanical precision. Alive. Against all odds. Alive. He's going to make it. Sarah spun around. Admiral Keller stood behind her, still in his dress blues, looking like he hadn't slept in days. "You should go home, Admiral. Get some rest." "So should you." Keller moved to stand beside her, his eyes on Ramirez. "But we're both still here. Funny how that works." Sarah said nothing. "His wife is on her way from Camp Pendleton. Should be here by 0800. 2 kids ages 3 and 5. Keller's voice was soft. "They almost lost their father tonight." would have lost him if not for you. If not for a whole team, paramedics, nurses, Castellanos. Stop. Keller's voice sharpened. Stop diminishing what you did. Stop hiding behind false humility. You saved this Marine's life using skills that most doctors don't possess. Own that, Sarah. Own who you are. I know who I am. Do you? Keller turned to face her fully, because from where I'm standing, you're a woman who spent 4 years running from the best version of herself. And I can't figure out if it's guilt or fear or just exhaustion. Sarah's jaw clenched. You don't know anything about what I've been through. Don't I? I was there, Sarah. I saw the after-action reports. I read the casualty lists. I know about Kandahar. I know about the ambush that killed 6 Marines while you were trying to save them. I know you spent 42 hours in surgery afterward, trying to put back together the ones who survived. I know you collapsed from dehydration and exhaustion, and they had to medically evacuate you because you couldn't stand anymore. Sarah's hands fisted at her sides. Stop. I know that you blame yourself, that you carry the names of every person you couldn't save like stones in your pockets, dragging you down, making every step harder. Keller's voice gentled. And I know that you're wrong, that you gave everything you had and more, that you saved hundreds when you could have saved none. You don't understand. Then help me understand, because right now all I see is the most gifted combat medic of her generation, wasting away on night shifts, hiding from a world that desperately needs what she knows. Sarah turned away, blinking hard against the pressure building behind her eyes. I can't go back. I can't be that person again. It costs too much. I'm not asking you to go back. I'm asking you to go forward. Keller pulled the folder from his coat again and set it on the counter beside Ramirez's bed. Read it, please. That's all I'm asking. He left before she could refuse. Sarah stared at the folder for a long time. Manila, standard issue. Could have contained anything or nothing. She picked it up. Inside were 3 documents. The first was a proposal for a new training program at the Naval Medical Center in San Diego, Advanced Combat Trauma Medicine. The second was a curriculum outline covering techniques that weren't taught in any civilian medical school. The third was a letter of appointment for her as director. Sarah's breath caught. The salary was listed, double what she made now. The benefits were listed, full military healthcare, housing allowance, research budget. The expectations were listed. Develop curriculum, train instructors, personally teach advanced courses to combat medics and corpsmen preparing for deployment. At the bottom in Keller's handwriting, you don't have to deploy, you don't have to go back to war. But you could make sure the ones who do go back have the knowledge to save lives. Your knowledge, Ghost's knowledge, before it's lost forever. Sarah sat down hard in the plastic chair beside Ramirez's bed. This was impossible. This was everything she'd run from. This was putting herself back in the world that had broken her, that had taken pieces of her soul and left scars that went deeper than skin. But it was also a way forward, a way to use what Ghost had learned without being Ghost, a way to save lives without watching them slip away under her hands. The ICU door opened again. This time it was Dr. Castellanos, looking exhausted and somehow smaller than he had in the ER. He stopped when he saw Sarah. I was checking on Ramirez, he said quietly, making sure post-op vitals were stable. They are. Castellanos moved to the other side of the bed, checking monitors, reviewing charts. Professional, thorough, everything a good doctor should be. I meant what I said earlier, he said without looking up, about wanting you on my surgical team. We could use someone with your skills. I'm a floor nurse. You're a trauma specialist who happens to be working as a floor nurse. There's a difference. Now he did look up. I've been head of trauma surgery here for 10 years. In that time, I've worked with hundreds of nurses, dozens of residents, and I've developed a reputation for being difficult. That's one word for it. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Fair, but I'm difficult because I demand excellence, because I know that in trauma medicine, good enough gets people killed. And tonight you showed me a level of excellence I didn't know was possible outside of textbooks and war zones. He paused. You also showed me that my arrogance almost killed a patient. That's not something I can forget or forgive easily. Sarah stood up, suddenly uncomfortable with where this was going. Dr. Castellanos, Marcus, please. I think after tonight we're past formalities. Marcus, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not interested in trauma surgery. I work nights. I keep my head down. I do my job and go home. That's all I want. Is it? The question was gentle but pointed, because what I saw tonight didn't look like someone who just wanted to do their job and go home. What I saw was someone who came alive in that OR, who found something they'd been missing. Sarah's throat tightened. You're wrong. Maybe, but I don't think so. Marcus picked up the folder that Keller had left. This looks official. Want to tell me what it is? None of your business. Also fair. He set it down. But if it's what I think it is, if someone's offering you a way back into trauma medicine, I hope you'll consider it. Not for me, not for this hospital, but for all the people who need what you know and don't even realize it yet. He left, and Sarah was alone again, with the beeping machines and the sleeping Marine, and the folder that might as well have been a bummer speaking for how much it threatened to blow up her carefully reconstructed life. She opened it again, read through the details more carefully. The training program would start in 6 months. Enough time to relocate to San Diego to prepare curriculum to mentally prepare for stepping back into a world she'd left behind. Enough time to change her mind 1,000 times. Sarah closed the folder and tucked it into her bag. She'd think about it later. Maybe. Probably not. She checked Ramirez's vitals one more time, adjusted his IV drip, and headed for the door. A young nurse couldn't have been more than 25 was coming in for the next check. She stopped when she saw Sarah. You're her, aren't you, Ghost? Sarah's stomach dropped. I don't know what you're talking about. My brother served with the Marines. He told me stories about a medic who saved his entire squad after an IED attack in Afghanistan. Said she worked on them for 6 hours straight, wouldn't stop even when the base came under fire. Said she was called Ghost because she moved like smoke through the battlefield. The young nurse's eyes were shining. He said she was the reason he came home. The reason any of them came home. Sarah couldn't breathe. What's your brother's name? James Cooper. He was a Lance Corporal in 2012. Cooper, Sarah remembered him, 19 years old, both legs shattered below the knee, internal bleeding, sucking chest wound. She'd worked on him for 7 hours, not 6. Had refused to let him die even when the other medics said there was no point, that he'd lost too much blood, that they should focus on the ones they could save. He walks with a limp now, the nurse continued, but he walks. He's married, has a daughter named Sarah after you, because you gave him a life when everyone else had already written him off. The pressure behind Sarah's eyes finally broke. Tears spilled over before she could stop them. The young nurse stepped closer. I just wanted to say thank you for giving me my brother back, for giving his daughter a father. She paused. And I wanted to ask, would you teach me not officially, just when you have time? I want to learn what you know. I want to be able to save people the way you did. Sarah wiped her eyes roughly. I'm not a teacher. Yes, you are. You just don't know it yet. The nurse went to check on Ramirez, leaving Sarah standing in the doorway with tears on her face and a question burning in her chest that she couldn't answer. The rest of the shift passed in a blur. Sarah moved through her rounds on autopilot, checking vitals, dispensing medications, helping patients to the bathroom. Normal work, invisible work. The kind of work that let her disappear into routine. But everywhere she went, people were talking. About the Marine who'd been shot, about the surgeon who'd lost his temper, about the quiet night nurse who'd turned out to be some kind of military legend. I heard she was a Navy SEAL, someone whispered in the break room. Impossible, women can't be SEALs. Well, she did something with the SEALs, special forces or something. They called her Ghost. I heard she saved 50 people in one night during a terrorist attack. I heard it was 100. The stories grew with each telling, becoming more fantastical, more divorced from reality. Sarah kept her head down and said nothing. Let them talk. Let them spin legends. In a few days, something else would happen and they'd forget all about it. That's what she told herself anyway. At 06:30, just before shift change, Sarah was finishing paperwork at the nurse's station when the elevator doors opened and a woman stepped out. She was maybe 30, wearing jeans and a Marine Corps t-shirt, her dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. Her eyes were red from crying. 2 small children clung to her hands, a boy and a girl, both looking scared and exhausted. I'm looking for Cole Ramirez, the woman said, her voice shaking. They told me he was in ICU, but I don't know where. I'll take you. Sarah stood immediately coming around the desk. You must be his wife. Maria, and this is Danny and Sophia. Maria's eyes filled with fresh tears. They said he was shot, that he almost died, but they wouldn't tell me anything else over the phone. Sarah knelt down to eye level with the children. Your dad is going to be okay. He's sleeping right now because the doctors gave him medicine to help him heal, but he's strong and he's going to get better. The little girl Sophia stared at Sarah with huge brown eyes. Is my daddy a hero? Sarah's throat closed up. Yes, sweetheart. Your daddy is a hero. She led them to the ICU, talking quietly with Maria about Cole's condition, about the surgery, about what to expect. Professional, calm, giving information without frightening the children more than they already were. They reached Ramirez's room. Maria stopped in the doorway, one hand flying to her mouth when she saw her husband intubated and bandaged and hooked up to a dozen machines. Oh God, Cole. Sarah touched her shoulder gently. The tube in his throat is helping him breathe while he heals. We'll remove it in a day or two when he's stronger. The bandages look scary, but underneath everything is healing well. He's going to recover fully. You're sure? I'm sure. Maria moved to her husband's bedside, taking his hand carefully, mindful of the IV lines. The children hung back, frightened by all the machines and beeping monitors. He asked for you, Maria said, suddenly looking back at Sarah. In the ambulance. The paramedics told me. He kept saying he needed Ghost. That Ghost would save him. She paused. That's you, isn't it? Sarah nodded slowly. He told me about you, about what you did for his unit in Yemen, about the ambush and how you... Maria's voice broke. How you ran into enemy fire to pull out wounded Marines. How you saved 12 people that day when any sane person would have stayed in cover. I did my job. You did more than that. You gave those Marines a chance to come home to their families. You gave me my husband back. Maria reached out and took Sarah's hand. Thank you. Thank you for being there. Thank you for saving him. Thank you for being willing to risk everything to help people you don't even know. Sophia tugged on Sarah's scrubs. Are you an angel? The question hit Sarah like a physical blow. She knelt down again, looking into the little girl's innocent eyes. No, sweetheart. I'm just a nurse who was lucky enough to help your daddy when he needed it. But you saved him. Daddy says angels save people. Sarah had to look away before the child saw her cry again. Your daddy saved himself by being strong and brave. I just helped a little bit. Maria squeezed Sarah's hand. Will you come back to check on him, I think it would mean a lot to Cole to know you were here. That Ghost didn't just save him and disappear. Every instinct Sarah had screamed at her to say no, to maintain distance, to stay invisible. But she looked at those two children and at their mother holding their father's hand, and at the Marine who'd refused treatment from anyone but her because he'd trusted Ghost to save him when no one else could. I'll come back, she heard herself say. I promise. She left the ICU and headed for the locker room. Her shift finally over, she was changing into street clothes when her phone buzzed. Unknown number, she almost didn't answer, but something made her thumb the accept button. Mitchell? A voice she didn't recognize. Male gruff with a southern accent. This is Sergeant Major Tom Briggs, Marine Corps Base Camp Pendleton. I'm calling about Gunnery Sergeant Ramirez. Sarah's heart rate kicked up. Has something happened? Is there a problem with... No, ma'am, he's stable according to the hospital. I'm calling because I need to know if the rumors are true, if you're really Ghost. Sarah closed her eyes. Sergeant Major, I don't think... Because if you are, I've got 23 combat medics and corpsmen currently preparing for deployment to the Middle East. And every single one of them needs training that the Navy isn't providing. Training and techniques that saved lives in Iraq and Afghanistan, but aren't part of the official curriculum anymore. His voice hardened. I've lost good Marines because their medics didn't know how to handle injuries that you handled routinely. And I'm not willing to lose more because the brass decided that peacetime protocol is good enough for wartime wounds. Sarah sat down on the locker room bench. What are you asking me? I'm asking if you'd be willing to come to Pendleton, just for a weekend, run a training session, show these kids what you know before they ship out and have to learn it the hard way. He paused. I'm asking Ghost to help me keep my Marines alive. I'm not Ghost anymore. I'm just You're the woman who saved Ramirez's life last night, using skills that the head trauma surgeon at a major hospital didn't have. You're the woman whose techniques are still being studied by military medical personnel around the world. You're the woman who saved more lives in 8 years than most doctors save in a lifetime. His voice gentled slightly. And you're the woman who can make sure the next generation of combat medics has the tools to do the same. Ma'am, I'm not ordering you. I'm begging you. Help me keep my Marines alive. Sarah stared at the folder in her bag. At the proposal from Admiral Keller. At the impossible choice she'd been avoiding since the moment that Marine had gasped her call sign and torn down every wall she'd built. I need to think about it, she said finally. Fair enough, I'll give you my number. Call me when you're ready, or don't call and I'll understand. He rattled off digits that Sarah mechanically wrote down. But ma'am, those Marines ship out in 6 weeks. Whatever you decide, decide fast, because every day you wait is a day they don't learn what might save their lives. He hung up. Sarah sat in the quiet locker room, surrounded by the familiar smell of antiseptic and the distant beeping of monitors, and felt the last of her resistance crumbling. She'd run for 4 years, built a new life, become invisible, buried Ghost under layers of routine and deliberate mediocrity. But Ghost wouldn't stay buried, because Ghost wasn't just a call sign or a legend or a collection of skills learned in war zones. Ghost was the part of her that couldn't walk away from someone who needed help. The part that ran toward danger instead of away from it. The part that looked at a dying Marine and saw not a hopeless case but a challenge to overcome. The part that saved lives because that's what she was meant to do. Sarah pulled out the folder again. Read through the proposal one more time. Looked at the curriculum outline, the salary, the expectations. Then she pulled out her phone and dialed a number she'd memorized but never called. Admiral Keller answered on the second ring. Sarah, I need conditions, she said without preamble. If I'm going to do this, it's on my terms. Name them. I don't deploy, ever. I train, I teach, I develop curriculum, but I don't go back to war. That part of my life is over. Agreed. I get final say on curriculum content. No interference from brass who think they know better because they read a report. Agreed. And I want authorization to run training sessions at military bases before the program officially starts. There are Marines deploying in 6 weeks who need this knowledge, now not in 6 months. Keller was quiet for a moment. That's going to require some paperwork, some fast tracking of your clearances. Can you do it? For you, Bem. I can have everything ready in 72 hours. Sarah took a breath, let it out slowly. Then I'm in. Officially, I'll take the position. She could hear the smile in Keller's voice. Welcome back, Ghost. The worlds have been waiting for you. Sarah ended the call and sat there, her hands shaking again, but this time from something that might have been fear, or might have been relief, or might have been the terrible, wonderful feeling of stepping back into purpose after years of running from it. She'd made the choice. Now she had to live with it, and God help her, she had no idea if she was strong enough to survive what came next. Sarah didn't go home after her shift ended. She couldn't. The apartment she'd rented 18 months ago, small, anonymous, deliberately chosen because it was exactly like 1,000 other apartments in 1,000 other cities, suddenly felt like a cage waiting to close around her. Instead, she drove. North on the 5 windows down, despite the morning chill radio off because she needed silence to think. Or maybe to stop thinking. She wasn't sure which anymore. Her phone rang at 07:45. Jennifer. The charge nurse. Sarah let it go to voicemail, then listened to the message at the next red light. Sarah, it's Jen. I know you're off shift, but you need to know something. The hospital administrator wants to meet with you at 1400 today. Something about the incident with Castellanos. And there are reporters in the lobby asking about Ghost. Someone leaked the story. I don't know who, but it's spreading fast. Call me back. Sarah deleted the message and kept driving. At 8:20, her phone rang again. Unknown number. She answered this time some masochistic part of her unable to resist. Is this Sarah Mitchell? A woman's voice. Young, eager. This is Jessica Torres from Channel 7 News. We're running a story about the heroic nurse who saved a Marine's life last night, and we'd love to interview you. Our viewers want to hear from Ghost herself. Sarah hung up. The phone rang again immediately. Different number. She turned the phone off and threw it in the passenger seat. By 9 o'clock, she'd made it to a beach she didn't recognize. somewhere north of Oceanside, south of San Clemente. Empty except for a few early morning joggers and a man walking his dog. Sarah sat on the sand and watched the waves roll in, trying to remember the last time she'd done something this simple, this pointless, this human. 4 years, that's how long it had been since she'd just sat somewhere and existed without purpose, without duty, without the weight of someone's life depending on her next decision. 4 years since she'd walked away from the military and told herself she'd never look back. She'd lasted one night. One dying Marine was all it took to shatter 4 years of careful distance. Sarah pulled her knees to her chest and let herself feel the full weight of what she'd just agreed to. Teaching combat medicine meant reliving every decision, every crisis, every moment where she'd chosen who lived and who died. It meant opening up wounds she'd spent years trying to heal. It meant becoming Ghost again, at least partially, at least enough to show others how to do what Ghost had done. And it terrified her. The sun climbed higher. The beach filled with families, kids building sandcastles, couples walking hand in hand. Normal people doing normal things. Sarah used to be one of them. Before the military, before Iraq, before she learned that the human body could survive things that should kill it and fail from injuries that should be survivable. Before she learned that sometimes saving a life meant choosing not to save another. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She turned it back on without consciously deciding to. Text message from Admiral Keller. Paperwork is moving faster than expected. You are cleared to start training sessions within 48 hours. Camp Pendleton is ready when you are. No pressure, but Sergeant Major Briggs is already telling his Marines that Ghost is coming. Don't make a liar out of me. 48 hours. 2 days to prepare curriculum for teaching skills she'd learned over 8 years of deployment. 2 days to figure out how to compress a lifetime of trauma medicine into something coherent enough to save the next generation of combat medics from learning everything the hard way. Sarah's hands were shaking again. She typed back, I need access to the medical simulation lab at Pendleton, full trauma scenarios, and I need current deployment medical protocols. What are they teaching now? Keller's response came back in under a minute. Done, I'll have everything waiting for you, but Sarah, you should know the current protocols are inadequate. We've lost good people because the training doesn't match the reality they're facing downrange. That's why we need you. Sarah stared at the message until her vision blurred. Lost good people. The words haunted her because she knew exactly what they meant, knew the weight of those words, knew the faces that went with them. She stood up, brushed sand off her jeans and headed back to her car. Time to stop running. By 1100, Sarah was standing outside Mercy Heights Medical Center, again staring at the main entrance like it was enemy territory. The reporters were gone, probably given up or been kicked out by security, but she could see people inside the lobby clustered around the reception desk, talking with the kind of animated gestures that meant gossip was flowing. She went in through the employee entrance instead. The elevator ride to the 4th floor felt like ascending to an execution. The administrator's office was on 4, corner suite, windows overlooking the parking lot. Sarah had never been inside it, never had reason to. Floor nurses didn't get called to the administrator's office unless something had gone catastrophically wrong. The secretary looked up when Sarah entered the waiting area. Mrs. Mitchell, Mr. Donnelly is expecting you. Go right in. Thomas Donnelly was 62, gray-haired, with a face that suggested he smiled maybe twice a year and regretted it both times. He'd been hospital administrator for 15 years and ran Mercy Heights like a particularly efficient corporation. He stood when Sarah entered, didn't offer his hand. Miss Mitchell, please sit. Sarah sat. Donnelly folded his hands on his desk. I'm sure you're aware why you're here. Dr. Castellanos filed a report about the assault. He did, along with statements from 6 witnesses, security camera footage, and a formal recommendation that the hospital conduct a full investigation. Donnelly's expression didn't change. He's also submitted his resignation. Sarah's head snapped up. What? Effective immediately. He stated that his behavior was inexcusable and that he couldn't continue in his position knowing he'd assaulted a colleague. He's recommended you as his replacement as a head of trauma surgery. The room tilted. That's insane, Sarah said. I'm a nurse. I'm not even a doctor. I can't. I know. The recommendation is obviously impractical. Donnelly pulled out a different folder. However, it does create an interesting situation. We have a trauma surgeon position to fill a nursing staff that's apparently been working alongside someone with extraordinary qualifications that we knew nothing about, and media attention that's going to make this hospital either look like heroes or incompetent fools depending on how we handle it. Sarah's stomach churned. What do you want from me? I want to know what actually happened last night, not the medical details. I have those reports. I want to know how a night shift nurse ended up performing trauma surgery and why one of the most arrogant surgeons I've ever met is now falling on his sword to protect you. Sarah met his eyes. Castellanos isn't protecting me. He's being honest about his mistake. And I didn't perform surgery. I assisted. There's a difference. According to the OR nurses, you did considerably more than assist. I did what was necessary to keep a patient alive. That's my job. Donnelly leaned back in his chair, studying her with eyes that had probably ended more than a few careers. Your personnel file is remarkably thin, Ms. Mitchell. High school diploma, EMT certification, some college no degree, Army Medical Corps 4 years honorable discharge, current nursing license, no disciplinary actions, no complaints, perfectly average performance reviews from every shift supervisor. He paused. And yet in a single night, you've revealed yourself to be anything but average. So I'll ask you directly, who are you, Sarah Mitchell, and why have you been hiding? Sarah's throat tightened. I'm not hiding, I'm just doing my job. You're wasting your talent on night shifts and basic patient care. You could be teaching training leading. Instead, you're changing bedpans and taking vitals. Donnelly's voice sharpened. That's not humility, that's cowardice. The word hit like a slap. You don't know anything about me, Sarah said, her voice low and dangerous. No, I don't, because you've made sure of that. Donnelly opened another file. But I know what Dr. Castellanos told me this morning, that you identified and corrected a critical error that would have resulted in patient death, that you performed a delicate vascular repair using techniques he'd never seen before, that you saved a Marine's life using skills that most trauma surgeons don't possess. He closed the file. I also know that we have reporters asking questions, veterans groups calling to verify if Ghost really works here, and a public relations nightmare brewing because apparently we've had a military legend working night shifts and nobody noticed. His expression hardened. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to go on administrative leave while we investigate the assault. You're going to avoid all media contact, and you're going to decide whether you want to keep hiding or actually use the skills you clearly possess. Sarah stood up. Am I fired? No, but you're also not welcome back on the floor until this is resolved. Go home, Ms. Mitchell. Figure out what you want. Because this hospital can't afford to have someone with your abilities wasting away in obscurity, and I can't afford to have a public relations disaster because we didn't know what we had. Sarah walked out without another word. The hallway felt too bright, too loud, too full of people who stopped talking when they saw her and started whispering the moment she passed. She made it to the parking lot before the panic attack hit. Her vision tunneled, her chest constricted. Her hands shook so badly she dropped her car keys twice before managing to unlock the door. Inside the car, she gripped the steering wheel and forced herself to breathe. In for 4 counts, hold for 4, out for 4. The technique she'd taught to Marines having panic attacks in combat zones. It worked. Slowly, but it worked. By 13:30, Sarah was home. The apartment was exactly as she'd left it, anonymous, impersonal, more like a hotel room than a home. No photos on the walls, no personal touches, nothing that said Sarah Mitchell lives here, nothing that said anyone lived here. She stood in the middle of the living room and realized she couldn't remember the last time she'd invited someone over. Couldn't remember the last time she'd cooked a real meal, or watched a movie, or done anything that wasn't work or sleep or the mechanical maintenance of existence. This wasn't living. This was hiding. Donnelly had been right about that, at least. Sarah's phone rang. She checked the caller ID this time. Jennifer again? She answered. Hey. Oh, thank God. Sarah, where are you? Are you okay? I heard about the meeting with Donnelly, and I swear, if he fired you, I'm fine. Administrative leave pending investigation. That's bullshit. You didn't do anything wrong. I know, but it's protocol. Sarah sat down on her couch, suddenly exhausted. Jen, can I ask you something? Anything. Am I a coward? The question hung in the silence. What gnome, Sarah? Why would you even? Because I've spent 4 years hiding, keeping my head down, pretending to be less than I am because I was afraid of being seen. Sarah's voice cracked. And now everyone's looking, and I don't know how to handle it. Jennifer was quiet for a long moment. You're not a coward. You're someone who survived something terrible and found a way to keep going. That's not cowardice. That's survival. Is that, or is it just running from the hard things? Sarah, you ran into an ER where everyone was panicking and saved a man's life. You stood up to Castellanos when he was being an ass. You did surgery on a critically wounded Marine and didn't flinch. That's not running. Jennifer's voice gentled. That's courage, even if you can't see it yet. Sarah wiped her eyes. I'm leaving Mercy Heights. I accepted a position training combat medics. What when? This morning it's with the Navy, teaching advanced trauma medicine to people deploying to war zones. Jennifer whistled softly. Wow, that's amazing, Sarah. Scary as hell, but amazing. I'm terrified. Good. That means it matters. That means it's worth doing. Jennifer paused. But Sarah, don't leave without saying goodbye. You've touched more lives here than you know. People deserve the chance to thank you. Sarah promised she wouldn't, even though every instinct screamed at her to just disappear in the middle of the night and never look back. They hung up and Sarah sat in her silent apartment staring at walls that had never felt like home. At 1600, there was a knock on her door. Sarah wasn't expecting anyone. Didn't have friends who dropped by unannounced. Didn't have friends, period. She checked the peephole. Admiral Keller stood in the hallway, still in his dress blues, looking official and out of place in her shabby apartment complex. Sarah opened the door. Admiral, how did you know where I live? I'm very good at finding people who don't want to be found. He held up a bag from a local deli. I brought lunch, or dinner. Whatever meal this counts as. May I come in? Sarah stepped aside. Keller entered and took in the sparse apartment with a single sweeping glance. His expression didn't change, but Sarah saw the flicker of understanding in his eyes. You live like you're expecting to deploy at any moment, he said quietly. Nothing permanent, nothing personal, nothing that would hurt to leave behind. It's easier this way. Easier isn't always better. Keller set the bag on her small kitchen table. I brought pastrami. Hope that's okay. They ate in silence for a few minutes. Then Keller set down his sandwich and looked at her directly. Talk to me, Sarah. What's really going on? I don't know what you mean. Yes, you do. You agreed to take the position. You're cleared to start training in 48 hours. You should be preparing, planning, excited even. Instead, you look like you're about to bolt. Sarah put down her own sandwich, suddenly not hungry. What if I can't do it? You can. You don't know that. You don't know what it cost me the first time, what it took out of me. Her voice was rising, but she couldn't stop it. You don't know what it's like to hold someone's hand while they bystand and know that if you'd been faster, smarter, better, they might have lived. You don't know what it's like to carry 37 names in your head and hear them every time you close your eyes. You're right. I don't know what that's like. Keller's voice was steady, gentle. But I know what it's like to send people into harm's way and wait to see who comes back. I know what it's like to read casualty reports and see names of people you train, people you knew, people whose families you met at Christmas parties. I know what it's like to lie awake at night and wonder if different orders, different strategies, different decisions might have saved them. He paused. And I know that the guilt never goes away, but we can't let it paralyze us. Because then the people who died, they died for nothing. But if we take what we learned, even at terrible cost, and use it to save others, then their deaths mean something. They become part of a legacy that saves lives. Sarah's eyes burned. That's a nice speech, Admiral, but it doesn't make it hurt less. No, it doesn't. And anyone who tells you it will is lying. Keller leaned forward. But Sarah, those 37 people you lost, how many did you save? How many Marines are alive right now with families and futures because Ghost was there when no one else could be? I don't know. I stopped counting. I didn't. Want to know the number? Sarah shook her head, but Keller told her anyway. 1,247. That's how many combat casualties you treated during your 8 years of deployment. Of those, 37 died. The rest lived. That's a survival rate of over 97% in combat conditions. His voice was fierce now. Do you understand what that means? Do you understand how extraordinary that is? Sarah couldn't breathe. The average combat medic has a survival rate around 85%. Good ones get to 90. You were at 97. You saved people who should have died, Sarah. You gave them futures they shouldn't have had. And now you have a chance to teach others how to do the same. But what if I fail? What if I can't teach it? What if someone deploys with my training and dies anyway because I didn't prepare them well enough? Then they die, and it's tragic, and it hurts. Keller's voice softened. But they'll have a better chance than they would have without your training. And that's all we can do, Sarah. Give people the best possible chance and hope it's enough. Sarah wiped her eyes roughly. I'm scared. Good. Fear keeps us sharp. It's when we stop being scared that we make fatal mistakes. They finished eating in a more comfortable silence. Then Keller pulled out a tablet and opened a file. This is the current combat medic training curriculum. I want you to look at it. Tell me what's missing, what you would add, what you think could save lives that the current program isn't covering. Sarah took the tablet reluctantly, started reading. Her expression changed as she scrolled through the material. This is inadequate, she said after 10 minutes. This is basically civilian trauma training with a few modifications for field conditions. It doesn't cover the reality of what they're going to face. Exactly, and that's why we need you. Sarah kept reading her mind, already starting to catalog gaps, identify missing techniques, formulate lessons that could fill the hole she was seeing. Tourniquet application is too basic. They're teaching standard placement, but not adaptation for non-standard wounds. And there's nothing here about managing massive hemorrhage in the first 60 seconds before you can even get equipment deployed. She scrolled faster. No training on makeshift intubation if you lose your equipment. No protocols for treating burns in contaminated environments. No section on triage when you have more casualties than you can possibly treat, and you have to choose who gets care and who doesn't. She looked up, her eyes blazing. This curriculum is going to get people killed, Admiral. Not immediately, not obviously, but over time the things that aren't here, the skills they won't have. People are going to die because of these gaps. Keller smiled. It was a sad smile, but genuine. That's why I need ghosts, Sarah. Because you see what's missing. Because you lived through the gaps and learned how to fill them. Because you can teach the next generation what no textbook will ever cover. Sarah stared at the tablet for a long moment. Then she stood up, walked to her bedroom, and came back with a worn notebook. The pages were filled with handwriting, notes, diagrams, techniques. 8 years of combat medicine distilled into one battered journal. I wrote everything down, she said quietly. Every technique I developed. Every lesson I learned. Every mistake that cost a life and every innovation that saved one. I told myself I'd burn it when I retired. That I'd let it all go and never look back. She handed the notebook to Keller. But I couldn't, because some part of me knew that this knowledge was too important to destroy. That someone, someday, might need it. Keller took the notebook like it was made of gold, opened it carefully. His eyes widened as he scanned the pages. Sarah, this is extraordinary. This is a complete field manual for advanced combat trauma medicine. This could save thousands of lives. That's why I'm giving it to you, to use for the training program, to make sure the next generation of medics has what they need. Sarah's voice was steady now. But I have conditions. Name them. I want full control over curriculum development. I want to choose the instructors who help me teach. And I want every single medic who goes through this program to know the names of the 37 people I lost, because they need to understand the cost of failure. They need to know what's at stake. Keller stood and offered his hand. You've got a deal, Ghost. Welcome to the fight. Sarah shook his hand, and for the first time in 4 years, she felt like she was moving towards something, instead of running away. At 1900, after Keller left, Sarah sat alone in her apartment and made a list. Things she needed to do before starting at Camp Pendleton. People she needed to say goodbye to. Arrangements she needed to make. At the top of the list, she wrote, Visit Ramirez, keep the promise. Because whatever else changed, whatever new life she was stepping into, she wasn't going to become the kind of person who forgot the people who trusted her. She was going to be Ghost again. But this time on her own terms. This time with her eyes open and her purpose clear. This time she was going to save lives, not by running toward the fire, but by teaching others how to survive it. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to balance the scales of the 37 names she carried. Maybe that would be enough to let her sleep at night. Maybe. Sarah returned to Mercy Heights at 06:30 the next morning, not because she had to, but because she'd made a promise to a 5-year-old girl that she'd check on her father. Some promises you keep no matter what. The ICU was quiet in the early morning, just the soft beeping of monitors and the hushed voices of the night shift preparing to hand off to day shift. Sarah signed in at the desk and the nurse on duty, someone she didn't recognize, looked up with wide eyes. "You're Ghost." Sarah's jaw clenched. "I'm Sarah Mitchell. I'm here to see Gunnery Sergeant Ramirez. He's awake. Been asking for you since about 500. His wife's with him." The nurse hesitated. "Ma'am, I just want to say, my brother's a Navy corpsman. He ships out next month. If there's any chance he could learn from you before he goes, give me his name and contact information. I'll make sure he gets into the first training session." Sarah said it before she could think better of it, before the old instinct to hide could kick in. The nurse's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you. Thank you so much." Sarah nodded and headed for Ramirez's room, her heart hammering against her ribs. Through the glass wall, she could see him propped up in bed, the intubation tube removed oxygen cannula in his nose. Maria sat beside him, holding his hand. The children were curled up in chairs, still sleeping. Sarah knocked softly. Maria looked up and immediately stood, a smile breaking across her exhausted face. "You came. Cole, she's here. Ghost is here." Ramirez turned his head slowly, grimacing with pain. When he saw Sarah, something in his expression crumbled relief mixed with gratitude, mixed with something deeper that Sarah couldn't name. "You're real," he rasped, his voice rough from the intubation. "I was starting to think, maybe I imagined you. Maybe I died and you were just part of the dream." Sarah moved to his bedside, automatically checking his vitals on the monitor, assessing his color, the clarity of his eyes. "You're not dead, Marine, and you're not dreaming. You're going to recover fully. Because of you. Because you're strong. Because you fought to stay alive. Because your body did what it needed to do to heal." Sarah kept her voice professional, clinical. "I just helped." Ramirez's hand shot out and grabbed her wrist. Not hard, not threatening, just desperate for connection. "Don't," he said. "Don't minimize what you did. You saved my life when I was bleeding out. You saw things the doctor missed. You fixed me when I was broken." His voice cracked. "In Yemen, when we got ambushed, I watched you run into enemy fire. I watched you work on Jackson for 40 minutes while bullets hit the wall behind you. You didn't flinch. Didn't stop. Didn't give up on him even when he flatlined twice." Sarah's breath caught. "You were there in Yemen. I was the one covering you, me and Martinez. We put ourselves between you and the shooters because we knew if you went down, Jackson was dead. Hell, half the squad was dead." Ramirez's grip tightened slightly. "You saved 12 Marines that day. 12. And you don't even remember me." Sarah looked at him. Really looked. The face was older now, harder, but underneath she could see the 23-year-old Lance Corporal who'd taken up position at a blown-out window and returned fire for 40 minutes straight while she'd worked. "I remember," she said softly. "You took a ricochet to the shoulder. Refused evacuation until everyone else was stable." Ramirez's eyes filled. "You do remember." "I remember everyone." Sarah gently extracted her wrist from his grip. "That's the problem. I remember all of you, every face, every name, every injury, and I remember the ones I couldn't save just as clearly as the ones I could." Maria stepped closer. "Is that why you left? Because you couldn't forget?" Sarah didn't answer directly. "I left because I gave everything I had, and when you give everything, there's nothing left to give anymore. You become empty, hollow, and empty people make mistakes. Fatal mistakes." "But you're going back," Ramirez said. It wasn't a question. "I heard the nurses talking. You're going to teach combat medicine, train the next generation." "I am." "Good." Ramirez settled back against his pillows, wincing. "Because there are kids deploying who need what you know, who need someone to teach them how to save lives when everything's gone to hell, and the textbook answers don't work anymore." Sophia stirred in her chair, blinking awake. When she saw Sarah, her face lit up. "The angel came back." Sarah knelt down beside the little girl's chair. "I told you I would. I keep my promises." "Is Daddy getting better?" "He is. He's going to need to rest for a while, and it's going to hurt sometimes, but he's going to be okay. Sophia threw her small arms around Sarah's neck. The hug was fierce, trusting, absolutely certain that Sarah was someone worth holding on to. Sarah's eyes burned. She hugged the child back, this tiny human who believed in angels and heroes and happy endings. "Thank you for saving my daddy," Sophia whispered. Sarah had to close her eyes against the tears. "You're welcome, sweetheart." When she stood up, Maria was watching her with an expression Sarah couldn't quite read. "You're good with her," Maria said quietly. "Do you have children?" "No." The word came out harsher than Sarah intended. She softened her tone. "No, I don't." "You should. You'd be a wonderful mother." Sarah almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Her a mother? She could barely take care of herself, could barely keep the nightmares at bay long enough to sleep through a full night, could barely maintain a normal conversation without defaulting to the clipped, efficient speech patterns of combat medicine. But she just smiled and said, "Maybe someday." She stayed for another 20 minutes answering Ramirez's questions about his recovery, explaining the surgeries to Maria in terms she could understand, playing a simple hand-clapping game with Sophia that made the little girl giggle. Normal things, human things, the kind of things Ghost had never had time for. When she finally left, Ramirez called after her. "Ghost Sarah, whatever we're supposed to call you now." She turned back. "Thank you for being there, for coming back, for not forgetting about us." His voice was thick with emotion. "You saved my life twice. Once in Yemen, once here. I'll never forget that. And I'll make damn sure my kids know who you are and what you did." Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and left before the tears could fall. In the hallway, she nearly collided with Dr. Castellanos. He looked terrible, unshaven, dark circles under his eyes, wearing yesterday's clothes, like he'd been at the hospital all night. "Sarah, I was hoping I'd catch you." "Dr. Castellanos, I heard about your resignation. You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did. What I did was unforgivable. I struck a colleague. I let my arrogance nearly kill a patient. He stopped, his voice breaking. "I've spent the last 24 hours reviewing everything that happened in that OR. Every decision I made, every time you tried to warn me and I didn't listen. And I realized something." Sarah waited. "I've been practicing medicine for 23 years, and I've been doing it wrong." Castellanos looked at her with hollow eyes. "Not the technical skills. Those are fine, but the mindset, the arrogance, the certainty that I knew best because I had the most degrees, the most experience, the most authority. That arrogance has probably killed people, Sarah. And I never knew because I never questioned myself." "Marcus, please let me finish." He took a shaky breath. "I'm not withdrawing my resignation. I can't work here anymore knowing what I did. But I wanted to ask you something before you leave for your new position." "What?" "Teach me, not officially, not as part of your military program, but privately. Teach me what you know. Show me how to see what you see, because I don't want to spend the rest of my career being the kind of doctor who misses things because he's too proud to listen." Sarah studied him. The great Dr. Marcus Castellanos, reduced to humility by one night of hard truths. "You're a good surgeon, Marcus. You don't need me to teach you anything." "Yes, I do, because being a good surgeon isn't enough if I'm a bad doctor, and a doctor who can't admit when someone else knows better. That's a bad doctor." He met her eyes. "Please, I'm asking as someone who wants to be better, who needs to be better." Sarah thought about it, about how much it must have cost him to ask, about the courage it took to admit that kind of fundamental flaw. "All right, I'll teach you, but not here. Come to Camp Pendleton in 2 weeks. Observe the training sessions. See how combat medicine works when you don't have the luxury of perfect conditions and unlimited resources. If you can handle that reality without your ego getting in the way, then we'll talk about private sessions." Castellanos' face transformed. Thank you, Sarah. I won't let you down. See that you don't, because if you waste my time with arrogance, I'll kick you out myself." She left him standing in the hallway and headed for the elevator, feeling lighter somehow. Like a weight she'd been carrying had shifted just slightly. The elevator doors opened on the main floor and Sarah stepped out into chaos. The lobby was packed with people. News crews, cameras, reporters shouting questions, security trying to maintain order. And at the center of it all, Admiral Keller standing at a hastily arranged podium addressing the crowd. He can confirm that Sarah Mitchell, also known by the call sign Ghost, is indeed a former Navy combat medic who served with distinction for 8 years. She has accepted a position as director of the new Advanced Combat Trauma Medicine program at Naval Medical Center San Diego, where she will train the next generation of military medical personnel. The reporters erupted with questions. Sarah tried to back into the elevator, but it was too late. Someone had spotted her. "There she is, Ms. Mitchell Ghost. Can you comment on—" Keller's voice cut through the noise. "Ms. Mitchell is not taking questions at this time. She's already given her statement through official channels. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have important work to do." He pushed through the crowd and grabbed Sarah's arm, steering her toward a side exit. "What the hell is this?" Sarah hissed. "Damage control. The story leaked last night. By this morning, every news outlet in the state was running pieces about the mysterious ghost who saved a Marine's life. I had to get ahead of it before they turned you into some kind of circus sideshow." They made it to Keller's car, a Navy sedan with official plates. He opened the passenger door for her and went, "Get in. We're going to Pendleton, right now, before this gets any worse." Sarah got in. They pulled out of the parking lot just as more news vans were pulling in. "I didn't ask for this," Sarah said. "I didn't want any of this attention." "I know, but it's here now and we have to deal with it. The good news is that the Navy Public Affairs Office is handling all media requests. They'll screen everything, keep the circus at bay, let you focus on your work. And the bad news." Keller glanced at her. "The bad news is that you're famous now. Ghost is famous. And that means expectations. Pressure. People watching everything you do, waiting for you to live up to the legend." Sarah leaned her head against the window. "I never wanted to be a legend. I just wanted to save lives. You did both. Now you have to live with it." They drove in silence for a while, the city giving way to highway, the morning sun climbing higher. Finally, Keller spoke again. "Sergeant Major Briggs has 23 medics waiting for you. They arrive at 0800 tomorrow for a 3-day intensive training course. After that, we've got another group scheduled, then another. Word is spreading fast. We're getting requests from every branch of service. Army wants to send people. Air Force, even the Coast Guard." Sarah's stomach nodded. "That's too many. I can't—" "You can, and you will, because you're not doing this alone." Keller handed her a tablet. "I've assembled a team of instructors, former combat medics and corpsmen, all with deployment experience. They'll help you teach. You develop the curriculum, you lead the program, but you don't have to carry it all yourself." Sarah scrolled through the names on the tablet, recognized several of them. Good people, people who'd seen combat and understood the reality she was trying to prepare students for. "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay, I can work with this." They reached Camp Pendleton at 10:15. Keller drove straight to the medical training facility, a modern building with state-of-the-art simulation labs and classrooms. Inside, Sergeant Major Briggs was waiting. He was exactly what Sarah expected, late 40s, built like a tank, eyes that had seen too much death and decided to fight harder because of it. He snapped to attention when Keller and Sarah entered. "Admiral, ma'am," he offered his hand to Sarah. "Sergeant Major Tom Briggs, it's an honor to finally meet Ghost in person." Sarah shook his hand. His grip was firm, respectful. "Just Sarah is fine, Sergeant Major. Only if you call me Tom." He gestured toward the simulation lab. "Your team is already here. They've been setting up equipment all morning. Want to meet them?" Sarah followed him through double doors into a space that took her breath away. It was a full-scale combat trauma simulation center. Realistic mannequins that could bleed, breathe, respond to treatment. Replicas of combat environments, dusty compounds, bombed-out buildings, tactical vehicles. Equipment stations stocked with everything from basic first aid to advanced surgical tools. And standing in the middle of it all, a group of 8 men and women in military fatigues, all watching her with expressions that ranged from awe to hope to desperate need. One of them stepped forward. A woman, maybe 35, with sergeant stripes and a face Sarah recognized. "Chief Petty Officer Sarah Mitchell, I'm Sergeant Lisa Chen. We met in Afghanistan 2011. You treated my squad after an IED attack. Saved 4 lives that day, including mine." Sarah remembered. The IED had shredded Chen's leg, fractured her pelvis, caused internal bleeding. Sarah had worked on her for 3 hours in a field hospital, while mortars fell close enough to shake the building. You're walking, Sarah said, her voice catching. They said you might not walk again. I had a good teacher, someone who refused to accept might not as an answer. Chen smiled. When I heard Ghost was putting together a training program, I requested transfer immediately. I want to teach others what you taught me. How to fight for every life. How to never give up even when the odds say you should. One by one, the other instructors introduced themselves. All of them had stories. All of them had been saved by Ghost or trained by someone who had been. All of them were here because they believed in what Sarah was trying to do. By the time the introductions were finished, Sarah was crying openly. Not from sadness, from overwhelming gratitude that these people, these warriors, had chosen to follow her back into the fight. Keller stepped forward. I'll leave you to it. You've got 24 hours to finalize curriculum and prepare for your first class. Sergeant Major Briggs will handle logistics. Admiral's quarters are available if you need rest. But Sarah, she looked at him. You've got this. You're not alone anymore. Let these people help you carry the weight. He left, and Sarah stood facing her team, her instructors, her fellow survivors, her community of people who understood what it meant to hold lives in your hands and refuse to let them slip away. All right, she said, wiping her eyes. Let's get to work. We've got Marines deploying in 6 weeks, and I'll be damned if they go into combat without knowing everything we can teach them. They worked through the night, building scenarios, developing lesson plans, creating training exercises that simulated the chaos and pressure of real combat trauma. Sarah drew on her notebook on 8 years of deployment experience on every hard-won lesson she'd learned. But she also listened to her team incorporated, their experiences, their insights, their innovations. This wasn't Ghost program anymore. This was something bigger, something collaborative, something that honored every medic and corpsman who'd ever saved a life in impossible conditions. At 0300, Chen found Sarah in the simulation lab still working on a particularly complex training scenario. You need to sleep, Chen said gently. The students arrive in 5 hours. I know, I just want to make sure everything's right. I want to make sure we're teaching them what they need to survive. Chen sat down beside her. Can I tell you something about that day in Afghanistan when you saved my life? Sarah nodded. I was conscious for most of it. In and out, but conscious. And I remember watching you work on me, watching you refuse to give up even when the other medics were saying I was too far gone. I remember thinking, this woman is going to save me because she doesn't know how to fail. Chen paused. But that's not true, is it? You do know how to fail. You've failed, you've lost people, but you keep fighting anyway, not because you can't fail, but because you refuse to let failure be the final answer. Sarah's hands stilled on the scenario she was building. That's what makes you Ghost, Sarah. Not that you never lose, but that you never stop fighting. And that's what you need to teach these kids tomorrow. Not just the techniques, but the mindset, the refusal to give up, the determination to fight for every single life, even when it seems hopeless. Sarah looked at Chen, this woman she'd saved, who was now here to help her save others, and felt something shift inside her chest. The 37 names she carried didn't get lighter. They never would. But somehow they felt less like stones dragging her down and more like stars lighting the path forward. Thank you, Sarah said quietly, for being here, for reminding me why this matters. Always, Chen said. Now come on, you need at least a few hours of sleep before you change the world tomorrow. Sarah let herself be led to the Admiral's quarters, let herself lie down for a few hours of rest that came surprisingly easy. At 07:45, she stood in front of the simulation lab, watching 23 young medics and corpsmen file in. They looked terrified, eager, desperate to learn everything they could before deployment. Sarah saw herself in every one of them. Saw the fear they were trying to hide, the determination driving them forward, the knowledge that lives would depend on what they learned here. Sergeant Major Briggs called them to attention. This is Chief Petty Officer Sarah Mitchell, Director of Advanced Combat Trauma Medicine. Some of you may know her by another name. When she speaks, you listen. When she teaches, you learn. Because everything she tells you could be the difference between bringing your Marines home alive or in body bags. Chief Mitchell, they're yours. Sarah stepped forward. For a moment, she couldn't speak. Couldn't find the words to bridge the gap between Ghost and Sarah, between legend and teacher, between what she'd been and what she was becoming. Then she looked at these young faces and saw Ramirez, saw Chen, saw Martinez and Jackson and Cooper, and every other person she'd saved. Saw the ones she'd lost too, the 37 names she'd carry forever. My name is Sarah Mitchell, she said clearly. 8 years ago, I was where you are now, scared, determined, trying to learn everything I could before deployment. And I'm going to be honest with you about something. She paused. Everything I teach you over the next 3 days, it won't be enough. You're going to deploy and you're going to face situations I can't prepare you for. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to lose people. And you're going to come home carrying names and faces that never leave you. The students shifted uncomfortably. But, Sarah continued, her voice strengthening, you're also going to save lives. You're going to do impossible things in impossible situations. You're going to be the difference between someone's family getting a flag or getting their loved one back alive. And every technique I teach you, any lesson you learn here, it's going to be because someone died teaching me that lesson first. She let that sink in. I lost 37 people during my deployments. 37 Marines and sailors who died despite everything I tried. And I'm going to teach you this course in their honor. Because they didn't die for nothing. They died teaching me what doesn't work, what kills people, what mistakes to avoid. And now I'm passing that knowledge to you paid for in blood so that you don't have to learn it the same way I did. Sarah looked each student in the eye. So when I teach you a technique and it seems complicated or unnecessary, remember that somewhere a Marine died because someone didn't know that technique. When I drill you on skills until you can do them in your sleep, remember that in combat, you will be doing them in conditions worse than sleep in chaos and darkness, under fire with your hands shaking and your heart pounding and someone screaming for help. She took a breath. I'm not going to lie to you and say this will be easy. I'm not going to promise that you'll save everyone, but I am going to promise that if you learn everything I teach you, if you take this seriously, if you fight for every single life with everything you have, then you'll save people who would otherwise die. You'll bring Marines home to their families. You'll make a difference that matters. The room was absolutely silent. Now, Sarah said, her voice shifting to command mode. Let's begin because we've got 3 days to teach you what took me 8 years to learn, and we're not wasting a single minute. Who can tell me the most common cause of preventable death in combat? A hand shot up. Hemorrhage, ma'am. Correct. And the average time from major arterial injury to death in combat conditions? 3 to 5 minutes, ma'am. Right again. So if you're the medic on scene and your Marine takes a round to the femoral artery, you have less than 5 minutes to identify the injury, apply intervention, and prevent shock. 5 minutes, less time than it takes to order coffee. She pulled out a training mannequin and a tourniquet. This is a cat tourniquet. My tourniquet. Standard issue. You've all been trained on it. But I'm going to show you 3 variations of placement that aren't in the manual developed because the standard placement fails in specific wound patterns. Pay attention because one of these variations saved a Marine's life 3 nights ago, and it could save yours. For the next 12 hours, Sarah taught. She demonstrated techniques, drilled students on skills, created scenarios that pushed them to their limits. Her team of instructors worked alongside her, providing one-on-one coaching, sharing their own experiences, reinforcing the lessons. By the end of the first day, the students were exhausted but transformed. They'd stopped looking like scared kids and started looking like medics. On day 2, Sarah introduced them to triage under fire. Set up simulations with multiple casualties, limited resources, and active shooter scenarios. Force them to make the impossible choices: who gets treatment first, who gets delayed care, who gets designated expectant, because the resources needed to save them would cost the lives of 3 others who could be saved more easily. She watched students break down crying when they had to mark a mannequin as expectant. Watch them struggle with the moral weight of choosing between lives. This is the hardest part, Sarah told them during a break. Harder than any technical skill, harder than working under fire. The choice to let someone die so that others can live, it will haunt you forever. But it's a choice you'll have to make, and you need to make it without hesitation, because hesitation in triage kills everyone. One student raised his hand. How do you live with it, with knowing you chose to let someone die? Sarah met his eyes. You don't, not really. You carry them with you forever. But you honor them by saving the ones you can, by making their sacrifice mean something, by becoming better because of what they taught you. On day 3, Sarah taught advanced techniques, surgical airways, emergency thoracotomies, damage control, resuscitation. Things that weren't in the standard curriculum because they were considered too advanced, too risky, too likely to be done wrong. I'm teaching you this because there will be situations where you don't have time to wait for a surgeon, where you are the surgeon, whether you want to be or not. And I'd rather you know how to do this imperfectly than not know how to do it at all. She demonstrated on a mannequin, her hands moving with the precision of someone who'd done this 100 times in conditions that made a simulation lab look like paradise. The students watched in awe, then practiced, made mistakes, tried again, gradually improved. By the end of day 3, when Sergeant Major Briggs called time, Sarah looked at her students and saw medics, real capable, prepared medics who had a fighting chance of bringing their Marines home alive. "You did good work," she told them. "All of you. I'm proud of the progress you've made, but remember, this was just the beginning. Keep studying, keep practicing, keep learning, because the moment you think you know everything, that's the moment you get someone killed." One student stood up. "Chief Mitchell, before we go, I wanted to ask, do you have any final advice? Something we should remember above everything else?" Sarah thought about it. About 8 years of deployment, about 37 names she'd never forget, about Ramirez and Chen and all the others she'd saved, about the choice she'd made to stop running and start teaching. "Remember this," she said finally. "You're going to be scared. You're going to doubt yourself. You're going to face situations where you don't know what to do, and there's no one to ask, and someone's life depends on you making the right choice anyway. When that happens, don't freeze. Don't panic. Just focus on the next thing you can do to help. Stop the bleeding. Open the airway. Treat the shock, one step at a time, one life at a time. And if you do that, if you keep fighting for every single person, you'll save more lives than you ever thought possible." She paused. "And when you lose someone, and you will lose someone, don't let it destroy you. Let it make you better. Learn from it. Honor them by saving the next person. Because that's what Ghost did. That's what every combat medic who came before you did. And that's what you're going to do." The students stood and applauded, not because it was required, but because they understood, because Sarah had given them something more valuable than techniques or knowledge. She'd given them purpose. As they filed out, several stopped to shake her hand, to thank her, to promise they'd make her proud. Sarah stood alone in the simulation lab afterwards, surrounded by the equipment and mannequins and the echoes of 3 days of intense training. Chen appeared beside her. "You did it. You actually did it. You took scared kids and turned them into medics who have a real chance." "We did it," Sarah corrected. "All of us. This was a team effort." "Maybe, but it was your vision, your passion, your refusal to let Ghost knowledge die with Ghost." Chen smiled. "You know what the students are calling this program? They're calling it the Ghost Protocol, the training that saves lives because someone cared enough to teach the hard truths." Sarah's eyes burned. The Ghost Protocol. I like that. Over the following weeks, Sarah ran training session after training session. Different groups, different branches of service, but the same desperate need for knowledge that could save lives. Word spread. The Ghost Protocol became legendary. Requests poured in from bases around the world. The Navy expanded the program, built new facilities, hired more instructors. But Sarah remained at the center of it all, teaching, refining, improving, never satisfied that she'd done enough. 6 months after that first training session, Sergeant Major Briggs called her. "Thought you'd want to know, the first group you trained just completed their deployment. 23 medics, treated over 400 casualties, 0 preventable deaths." Sarah's breath caught. Zero. They used your techniques, saved lives that would have been lost with standard training. One of them even performed an emergency thoracotomy in the field and saved a Marine who should have died. Briggs paused. "They're calling it the Ghost Effect, the measurable improvement in combat survival rates attributable to your training program." Sarah sat down hard. 0 preventable deaths, 400 lives saved, because she'd taught 23 students everything she knew. "Sarah," Briggs' voice was gentle. "You still there?" "Yeah, I'm here, just processing." "Well, process this. Those 23 medics are telling everyone about the Ghost Protocol, recommending it to their buddies. We've got a waiting list 6 months long of people who want to train under you. You've created something that's going to save thousands of lives over the next decade. After the call ended, Sarah walked outside into the California sunshine, looked up at the clear blue sky, thought about the path that had led her here from the chaos of combat deployments, to the quiet anonymity of night shifts, to this moment standing at the center of something bigger than herself. She thought about the 37 names she carried. They were still there, still heavy, still impossible to forget. But now balanced against them were hundreds of other names, thousands. People who'd lived because Ghost had refused to let her knowledge die. People who'd go home to their families because Sarah Mitchell had found the courage to step out of hiding and teach. Her phone buzzed, text message from Maria Ramirez. Cole walked today, first time since surgery. Doctors say full recovery expected. We're naming our next baby Sarah. Thank you for giving our family a future. Sarah smiled through her tears. Another message, this one from the young nurse whose brother was a Navy corpsman. Marcus graduated the Ghost protocol last week. Ships out next month. Says he's not scared anymore because he knows what to do. Thank you for saving him before he even needed saving. More messages, more lives touched, more futures secured. Sarah looked at her phone and realized something profound. Ghost hadn't died when she left the military. Ghost had just been waiting for Sarah to be ready to carry that mantle again, but on her own terms and her own way. She'd spent 4 years running from who she was, 4 years hiding, 4 years trying to forget. But you can't forget who you are. You can only choose what you do with it. Sarah Mitchell had chosen to save lives, first in combat zones, then in emergency rooms, now in classrooms and simulation labs. Different battlefields, same war, same mission. Save as many as possible. Honor the ones you lose. Never stop fighting. That was the Ghost protocol, not just a training program, a way of life, a commitment to making death work harder for every single victim it claimed. Sarah turned back toward the training facility where another class of medics waited to learn what she had to teach. She walked through the doors with her head held high, no longer running, no longer hiding, no longer afraid of the weight she carried, because that weight wasn't a burden anymore. It was ballast, keeping her grounded, keeping her focused, keeping her moving forward toward purpose instead of away from pain. Ghost was back, not the same as before, better, wiser, more complete. And this time she wasn't fighting alone. She had a team, a mission, a legacy that would outlive her and save lives long after she was gone. Sarah Mitchell had finally come home, not to a place, not to a past, but to herself, to the person she'd always been meant to be, to the healer who refused to let death win without a fight. And that was enough, more than enough. That was everything.